If you've ever stood in a room where everyone wants you gone, you already know the first rule of survival. Never let them see you flinch. Clara Vale learned that lesson young, watching her father's merchant empire collapse into debt and disgrace. But tonight, surrounded by the glittering cruelty of the imperial court, she's about to discover something far more dangerous than poverty. That being chosen by the most powerful man in the empire doesn't mean you're safe. It means you've just become the perfect target. What happens when the overlooked daughter of a ruined family walks into a palace where every smile hides a blade? Stay with me, because this isn't the story you think it is. The carriage wheels stopped, and Clara's stomach turned to ice. Through the narrow window, she could see the palace gates rising like golden teeth against the twilight. Beyond them, torches blazed along marble corridors that stretched toward horizons she couldn't name. Somewhere inside that fortress of light and stone, Grand Duke Lucien Arden was waiting. The man she would marry in less than 3 hours. The man she'd met exactly once for 7 minutes in a room full of witnesses. Her mother's voice floated up from the opposite seat, thin and desperate. Remember to keep your eyes down when the Duchess of Halvern speaks to you. And for heaven's sake, Clara, don't mention your father's business. Not ever. If anyone asks, I know. Clara's voice came out steadier than she felt. I'm nobody. I have nothing. I'm grateful for this opportunity. Her mother flinched at the edge in those words, but didn't argue. They both knew the truth. The Vale family had been drowning for 3 years, ever since the creditors came and her father's warehouses burned. Every door in the capital had closed against them. Every former friend had turned away. Clara had watched her younger sisters go hungry, while her mother sold jewelry piece by piece just to keep a roof over their heads. And then, like lightning from a clear sky, the summons had arrived. Grand Duke Lucien Arden requested Clara Vale's hand in marriage. Not requested, commanded. The imperial seal had been on the letter. Clara still didn't understand why. The carriage door opened. A servant in silver livery stood waiting, his face carefully blank. Clara stepped down onto cobblestones that gleamed like black glass, and the palace swallowed her whole. The reception hall was a cathedral of cruelty dressed in silk. Hundreds of candles burned in crystal chandeliers overhead, casting shadows that danced across walls covered in tapestries worth more than Clara's entire life. Nobles clustered in glittering groups, their laughter sharp as breaking glass. Women in gowns that cost small fortunes leaned close to whisper, their eyes sliding toward Clara like knives looking for soft places to cut. She recognized some of them. Lady Margot Thessaly, whose father controlled half the grain trade in the empire. Lord Kieran Voss, whose family had held the northern provinces for 200 years. The Duchess of Halvern, who'd once thrown Clara's mother out of a charity gala for daring to attend. They all stared at her now, with expressions ranging from shock to disgust to cold calculation. Clara kept walking. Her dress, borrowed from a distant cousin, altered hastily to fit, felt like armor made of paper. She could hear the whispers starting, spreading like fire through dry grass. That's her? The merchant's daughter? I heard her father died in debtor's prison. Why would the Grand Duke choose her? She's nothing. Nothing. The word followed her like a shadow. A hand closed around her elbow, and Clara nearly jumped. But it was only her mother, gripping tight enough to bruise, steering her toward a cluster of older women near the windows. The Countess of Breton, her mother hissed. She knew your grandmother. Be respectful. The Countess turned as they approached. She was a woman built from angles and ice, her silver hair piled high, her mouth a thin line of disapproval. Her eyes traveled over Clara from head to foot in a single cutting assessment. So, she said, and her voice could have frozen wine. You're the girl. Clara curtsied. It was automatic, beaten into her by years of her mother's desperate etiquette lessons. Your Grace, it's an honor to... Don't. The Countess held up one gloved hand. I have no interest in pleasantries. I'm simply trying to understand what could possibly have motivated the Grand Duke to select you for this arrangement. The women around her tittered. Clara felt heat crawl up her neck, but kept her face smooth. I'm afraid I don't know, Your Grace. I'm as surprised as anyone. Surprised. The Countess's eyebrow arched. How charmingly modest. Tell me, girl, do you even know who Lucien Arden is? What he's done? Clara opened her mouth, but the Countess didn't wait for an answer. He controls more territory than some kings. He's crushed 3 rebellions before they could properly start. 2 years ago, when Lord Harwick tried to undermine the Emperor's tax reforms, the Grand Duke had him stripped of his lands and titles in a single afternoon. Not through violence, through law, through influence so vast that Harwick's own allies abandoned him rather than risk Arden's displeasure. She leaned closer, and Clara could smell expensive perfume mixed with something sharper. Malice, maybe. Men like that don't marry merchants' daughters out of love, child. So I'll ask you again, why do you think you're here? The question hung in the air like a blade. Clara met the Countess's eyes. She'd spent 3 years learning to endure humiliation, to swallow rage, to smile, while people who'd once begged her father for loans now treated her like dirt. She'd gotten good at it. I don't know, she said quietly, but I intend to find out. Something flickered in the Countess's expression. Surprise, maybe, or reluctant respect. But before she could respond, a hush fell over the entire hall. Clara turned. Lucian Arden had entered the room. He didn't walk. He occupied space like a soldier claiming territory. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in black and silver that made him look like a storm given human form. His face was all hard lines and sharp angles, his dark hair pulled back from a face that might have been handsome if it hadn't been so completely devoid of warmth. But it was his eyes that stopped Clara's breath. Pale gray, cold as winter ice, scanning the room with the focused intensity of a predator counting prey. The nobles parted for him automatically. No one spoke. No one even seemed to breathe too loudly. He crossed the hall in a dozen strides, and then he was standing in front of Clara, looking down at her from what felt like a very great height. Miss Vale. His voice was deep, controlled, empty of inflection. Clara curtsied again. Her knees felt weak. Your Grace. Are you ready? She had no idea what he meant. Ready for what? The wedding? The life that came after? The destruction everyone seemed to think was inevitable? Yes, she said, because what else could she say? Something that might have been amusement touched the corner of his mouth. It vanished so quickly, she might have imagined it. Good. Come with me. He turned and started walking. Clara glanced at her mother, who looked terrified, then at the Countess, who was watching with undisguised fascination. Then she lifted her chin and followed the Grand Duke through the crowd. They walked through corridors lined with paintings of dead emperors and conquered territories. Servants bowed as Lucian passed, their heads dropping so quickly it was almost violent. Clara tried to keep up with his long stride, her borrowed shoes slipping slightly on the marble floors. Finally, he stopped in front of a set of heavy wooden doors. 2 guards stood on either side, motionless as statues. Lucian glanced at them, and they opened the doors without a word. Inside was a study, dark wood paneling, shelves packed with leather-bound books, a massive desk covered in maps and documents. A fire burned in the hearth, making shadows dance across the walls. Lucien closed the door behind them. The sound was final as a coffin lid. Then he turned to face Clara, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something almost human in his expression. Not warmth, but calculation. Assessment. The look of a man solving a very complex problem. You're wondering why I chose you, he said. It wasn't a question. Clara nodded anyway. You're clever enough to be frightened, he continued, but not so frightened that you'll collapse at the first sign of pressure. You've survived 3 years of social exile and financial ruin without breaking. You know how to be invisible when necessary. And most importantly, he took a step closer. You have no powerful allies who might try to control you. No family connections that would complicate your loyalty. Clara's chest felt tight. So I'm expendable. Yes, he said it without hesitation. But that's exactly why you might survive. She stared at him. I don't understand. Lucien moved to the window, looking out at the palace grounds below. The imperial court is a battlefield, Miss Vale. Every noble family is fighting for position, for influence, for the emperor's favor. They've been trying to marry their daughters to me for 5 years. Every single one of them saw it as an opportunity to gain leverage over me, to turn my wife into a spy, a puppet, a weakness they could exploit. So you chose someone with no power instead. Clara's voice came out bitter. Someone who can't hurt you. Someone who won't be used against me, he corrected, because you have nothing to gain by betraying me. Your family is ruined. Your social standing is destroyed. I'm the only thing keeping you from complete poverty." He turned back to face her. "In this palace, that makes you the safest person I could possibly marry." The words hit like fists. Clara felt something crack open inside her chest. Not heartbreak, but a different kind of pain. The pain of being seen so completely, reduced to nothing but strategic value. "And what do I get?" she asked, "besides being safe from poverty?" Lucien regarded her for a long moment. "You get to survive," he said finally, "which is more than most people manage inside these walls." The fire crackled. Clara thought about her mother's desperate face, her sister's empty stomachs, the years of shame and hunger, and watching everything fall apart. She thought about the Countess's cutting words, the whispers in the reception hall, the certainty in every noble's eyes that she didn't belong here. "I'll make you a promise," Lucien said, and his voice was different now, harder, edged with something that might have been warning. "If you follow my rules, if you stay out of court politics and don't try to build alliances behind my back, I will protect you. The nobles who want to destroy you won't get the chance. The servants who might betray you will be removed. The threats you don't even see coming will be eliminated before they reach you." He paused. "But if you cross me, if you try to use this marriage for your own schemes, I will cut you loose, and the court will tear you apart." Clara's hands were shaking. She clasped them together to hide it. "That's not a marriage. That's a transaction." "Yes," Lucien agreed. "It is." She wanted to scream. She wanted to run. She wanted to tell him to go to hell and drag her family back into poverty if that's what it took to escape this cold, calculated nightmare. But she didn't, because he was right. She had nowhere else to go. "Then I accept your terms," she said, and her voice only shook a little. Lucien nodded. "Good. The ceremony begins in 2 hours. Try not to look terrified during the vows." He walked past her toward the door, and Clara stood there alone in the firelight, wondering what she'd just agreed to. The wedding was a performance staged for vultures. Clara stood at the altar in a dress that wasn't hers, reciting vows she didn't believe, binding herself to a man who'd just told her she was nothing more than a strategic asset. The priest's voice droned on about duty and honor and eternal devotion. The nobles watched from the pews with expressions ranging from shock to rage to vicious delight. Lucien's hand was cold when he slipped the ring onto her finger. His face was empty when he kissed her, a brief, formal touch that meant nothing. When it was over, he led her through the crowd without speaking. Nobles bowed. Ladies curtsied. No one met Clara's eyes except to assess how quickly she might fall. The reception was worse. Tables piled with food Clara couldn't eat, her stomach too tight with dread. Musicians playing songs she didn't know, dancers spinning through patterns she'd never learned. And everywhere, whispers, stares, the constant pressure of being watched by people who hated her. A young woman in emerald silk approached Clara near the wine table. She was beautiful in the way palace women were beautiful, perfect and sharp and dangerous. Her smile was poison-dressed as kindness. "Lady Clara," she said, though Clara wasn't technically a lady yet. "I'm Elise Corvain. My father is the Duke of Meridian." Clara recognized the name. The Corvain family controlled the eastern provinces. They were one of the most powerful houses in the empire. "A pleasure," Clara said carefully. Elise's smile widened. "I simply had to introduce myself. We'll be seeing so much of each other now that you're here." The pause before that last word was deliberate. "Tell me, how did you and the Grand Duke meet? I'm dying to know the story." It was a trap. Clara could feel it. Any answer she gave would be wrong. "We met through mutual acquaintances," she said vaguely. "How romantic." Elise leaned closer, and her perfume was overwhelming. "You must be terrified, though, marrying into this world without any preparation, without any allies." Her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "If you ever need advice, you can always come to me. I'd be happy to help you. Navigate the court." The offer was as genuine as a viper's kiss. Clara could see it in Elise's eyes, the calculation, the hunger. She wanted something. Information, maybe. Leverage. A way to get close to Lucien through his expendable wife. "That's very kind," Clara said. "I'll keep it in mind." Elise's smile froze. She'd expected eagerness, desperation, gratitude. Instead, she'd gotten polite dismissal. Something cold flickered in her expression. Of course, she said, her voice like ice cracking. Enjoy your evening, Lady Clara. She glided away, and Clara exhaled slowly. One test passed, 1,000 more waiting. The night deepened. The celebration dragged on. Clara's feet ached in her borrowed shoes, and her face hurt from forcing smiles at people who despised her. Lucien had disappeared an hour ago, called away by some urgent business, a servant had explained. Clara was left alone in a room full of strangers who wanted her gone. She was standing near a window, trying to breathe, when she heard the voices. 2 men, just around the corner. They thought they were alone. Absolute madness. Arden's lost his mind. Keep your voice down, for God's sake. Why? Everyone's thinking it. Marrying that merchant girl? She'll be dead or disgraced within a month. Clara froze. She should walk away. She knew she should walk away, but her feet wouldn't move. I heard Lady Corvain already approached her, the first voice continued, trying to recruit her as a spy. Won't work. The girl's too scared to be useful. Scared or not, she's a liability. Arden built his reputation on control, on showing no weakness, and now he parades this nobody through the court like she matters? Exactly. Silence. Then the second voice, lower. Give it time. The court will eat her alive, and when she falls, Arden will cut her loose. He's too smart to let sentiment cloud his judgment. You think he feels anything for her at all? Of course not. This is Lucien Arden we're talking about. The man doesn't have a heart. He has a ledger. They laughed. The sound was cruel and familiar. The laughter of men who'd never known hunger, never feared ruin, never had to calculate the cost of every breath. Clara pressed her hand against the wall. Her whole body felt like ice. A ledger, that's all she was. An entry in his accounts. She waited until the voices faded, then made her way through the crowd toward the doors. No one tried to stop her. No one even noticed. She was already invisible again. A servant led her through endless corridors to the Grand Duke's wing, Clara's new rooms, apparently. The word rooms turned out to be inadequate. She walked through a sitting room larger than her family's entire house, past a dressing chamber filled with gowns she hadn't chosen, into a bedroom dominated by a bed big enough for 6 people. Everything was perfect. Everything was cold. Everything belonged to someone else. The servant bowed and left. The door clicked shut. Clara stood in the center of all that expensive emptiness and felt something break inside her chest. She'd known it would be bad. She'd prepared herself for humiliation, for isolation, for being treated like dirt. But somehow she hadn't been ready for this. The totality of it. The way every person in that palace had looked at her and seen nothing. No potential, no value. Just a mistake waiting to be erased. And Lucien. God. The way he'd explained it so clearly, so coldly. You're expendable. You're safe because you're worthless. You'll survive because you don't matter. Clara walked to the window. Below, the palace gardens stretched out in geometric perfection, lit by torches that burned like captive stars. Beautiful, pristine, absolutely devoid of warmth. She pressed her forehead against the glass and wondered how long she could endure this before she shattered completely. She woke to darkness and the sound of breathing that wasn't hers. Clara's eyes snapped open. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Someone was in the room. She could feel them, a presence in the shadows near the door. Don't scream. Lucien's voice, low and controlled. It's just me. Clara sat up, pulling the blankets close. She could barely see him in the darkness, just a silhouette against the faint light from the window. What are you doing here? This is my wing. Technically, these are my rooms. He moved closer, and she could see him better now, still dressed, his expression unreadable. I wanted to make sure you survived your first night without incident. I'm fine. The words came out sharper than she'd intended. Lucien was silent for a moment, then, You're angry. I'm expendable, Clara said. You made that very clear. I made our arrangement clear, he corrected. That's not the same as being worthless. Isn't it? Clara's hands tightened on the blankets. You married me because I'm nobody. Because I have no power, no connections, no value except as a shield against political schemes. You said it yourself. I'm here because I can't hurt you. Yes? He said it without apology. But you're also here because you survived 3 years of complete social destruction without breaking. Because you're smart enough to recognize danger and stubborn enough to endure it. Because when the Countess of Breton tried to humiliate you tonight, you didn't flinch. He took another step closer. Most people in this palace were born into power. They've never had to fight for anything. You're different. Clara stared at him. That doesn't make me valuable. It makes me useful. In this world, Lucian said quietly, useful is valuable. The words hung between them. Clara wanted to argue, to rage, to throw everything back in his face. But what would that accomplish? He was right. She knew he was right. In the world he lived in, the world she'd just entered, sentiment was weakness. Loyalty was currency. People were tools. I heard them tonight, she said finally. The nobles. They're taking bets on how long I'll last before the court destroys me. Lucian's expression didn't change. They're wrong. How can you be sure? Because I won't let them. He moved to the window, looking out at the gardens below. Do you know what my father told me when I was 12? He said the empire was built on two things, fear and respect. Fear keeps your enemies at bay. Respect keeps your allies loyal. And the fastest way to lose both is to show weakness. He turned back to face her. You are my wife, Clara, which means attacking you is attacking me. And anyone who attacks me learns exactly why the Emperor keeps me close and his enemies keep their distance. Clara's throat felt tight. You're saying you'll protect me. I'm saying I already am. Before she could respond, he crossed to the door. His hand was on the handle when Clara spoke again. Why did you really choose me? Lucian stopped. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then, without turning around, because everyone else wanted something from me. You just wanted to survive. That made you the only honest person in this entire godforsaken palace. The door opened, closed. He was gone. Clara sat in the darkness for a long time after that, trying to understand what had just happened, trying to decide if she should believe him, trying to figure out if the Grand Duke had just offered her protection, or if he'd simply bought himself a weapon he hadn't realized he was holding. Morning came too fast and too bright. Clara woke to sunlight stabbing through curtains she'd forgotten to close, her body aching from a night spent barely sleeping. Every time she'd drifted off, she'd jerked awake again, convinced she'd heard footsteps or whispers or the sound of someone testing the door handle. The palace felt alive in the darkness, breathing and watching and waiting for her to make a mistake. She sat up slowly, taking in the room that was supposed to be hers now. In daylight, it looked even more alien, all silk and gold and furniture that cost more than her family had earned in a decade, a cage designed to look like luxury. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Before Clara could respond, the door opened and 3 women entered. Servants, she realized, all dressed in identical gray uniforms, all wearing the same carefully neutral expression that seemed to be mandatory in this place. The oldest one curtsied. Good morning, my lady. We're here to help you dress and prepare for breakfast with the Duchess of Halvern. Clara's stomach dropped. I'm sorry, what? The Duchess requested your presence this morning. The woman's voice was perfectly pleasant, perfectly empty. She's invited several other ladies of the court to join. It's quite an honor. An honor. Right. Clara had seen the Duchess at the wedding reception, a woman built from ice and cruelty, watching Clara with the focused intensity of someone planning an execution. I see, Clara said, because what else could she say? Give me a moment. The servants didn't move. They just stood there, waiting. Clara realized with a jolt that they intended to stay, to watch her, to dress her like a doll or a child who couldn't be trusted with her own clothes. She thought about Lucien's words from last night. Anyone who attacks you is attacking me. But he wasn't here now. These women answered to the palace, not to him. And if Clara made a scene on her first morning, if she showed weakness or fear or pride, it would spread through the court before noon. So she stood. Let them unlace her nightgown. Let them guide her through the humiliating process of being dressed like a puppet while they evaluated every inch of her skin, her hair, her body. Looking for flaws, counting her inadequacies. One of the younger servants, a girl who couldn't have been more than 16, leaned close while fastening Clara's corset. Her voice was barely a whisper. The blue dress, my lady, not the green. Trust me. Clara met her eyes. The girl's expression was still neutral, but there was something there. A warning, maybe. or the faintest flicker of sympathy. "The blue one," Clara said to the older servant. "Please." The woman's mouth tightened almost imperceptibly. "As you wish, my lady." They dressed her in layers of silk and spite, pulled her hair into an elaborate style that felt like it was designed to give her a headache, and finally stepped back to assess their work. The older servant nodded once, satisfied or disappointed. Clara couldn't tell which. "You'll do," she said, which somehow felt worse than an outright insult. The breakfast room was a trap disguised as hospitality. 6 women sat around a table laden with pastries and fruit and tea served in cups so delicate they looked like they'd shatter if you breathed on them too hard. Every single one of them was older than Clara, richer than Clara, and infinitely more dangerous than Clara. They turned to look at her as she entered, their smiles sharp as broken glass. The Duchess of Halvern sat at the head of the table like a queen holding court. She was somewhere in her 50s, perfectly preserved through money and meanness, her face a study in controlled contempt. She gestured to an empty chair with one ring-laden hand. "Lady Clara, how kind of you to join us. I was just telling the others how remarkable it is that the Grand Duke chose someone so unexpected." Clara sat. The chair was too hard. "You're very kind to include me, Your Grace." "Oh, we're all just family here." The Duchess's smile could have frozen fire. "Speaking of which, you must tell us how you managed it. Landing the Grand Duke, I mean. We're all simply dying to know your secret." The other women leaned forward slightly, vultures circling. Clara reached for her teacup, buying time. Her hands were steady. That was something. "There's no secret, Your Grace. He asked. I accepted." "How wonderfully simple." This from a woman in ruby red, her dark hair coiled like a serpent. Lady Vivian something. Clara couldn't remember the family name. "And your family must be thrilled, going from complete destitution to the Grand Duke's household in one stroke." The emphasis on destitution was deliberate. Clara felt heat crawl up her neck, but kept her expression smooth. "My family is grateful for the opportunity, yes." "I'm sure they are." The Duchess selected a pastry with surgical precision. "Tell me, dear, what exactly did your father do before everything fell apart?" This was it, the first real attack. Clara could feel the room holding its breath, waiting to see if she'd defend her father, make excuses, try to salvage a reputation that was already ashes. She met the Duchess's eyes. "He ran a shipping business, Your Grace, until his partners embezzled everything and burned his warehouses to hide the evidence." Silence. The Duchess's eyebrows rose slightly. "How dreadful," she said, and Clara couldn't tell if the surprise was genuine or performed. "Were they caught?" "No, Your Grace. My father died before he could prove what happened. The courts ruled it was his own mismanagement." "How convenient!" Lady Vivian's voice dripped venom. "For them, I mean." Clara set down her teacup. Her hands were still steady. "Yes, very convenient." The Duchess studied her for a long moment. Then she smiled, and it was somehow worse than her contempt had been. "You know, I'm starting to understand what Lucien saw in you. You're tougher than you look, aren't you?" It wasn't a compliment. It was a threat wrapped in observation. Before Clara could respond, the door opened and Elise Corvain swept in, looking like emerald poison in a morning dress that probably cost more than a house. She stopped when she saw Clara, her perfect features arranging themselves into surprise. "Oh, Lady Clara, I didn't realize you'd be here." Liar. Everyone in this room had known exactly who would be here. "Lady Elise," the Duchess gestured to another empty chair. "Join us. We were just getting to know our newest addition to court." Elise sat with fluid grace, accepting tea from a servant without looking at him. "How lovely. I'm sure Lady Clara has so much to learn about palace life. It can be terribly confusing for newcomers." "I'm managing," Clara said. "Are you?" Elise's smile was all teeth. "That's wonderful. Though I have to ask, has the Grand Duke explained how things work here? The protocols, the expectations?" Another trap. If Clara said yes, she'd be claiming knowledge she clearly didn't have. If she said no, she'd be admitting ignorance and weakness. "He's been very clear about what he expects from me," Clara said carefully. "I'm sure he has." Elise exchanged a glance with Lady Vivian. "But there's what husbands expect, and then there's what the court expects. Two very different things, I'm afraid." The Duchess set down her cup. The sound was sharp in the sudden quiet. What Lady Elise means is that as the Grand Duke's wife, you'll be expected to participate in court functions. Charity galas, diplomatic receptions, social gatherings. You'll need to build relationships, form alliances, show the Empire that you're worthy of the position you've been given. Clara's throat felt tight. I understand. Do you? The Duchess leaned forward slightly. Because I'm not sure you do, dear. You see, Lucien Arden has spent years building his reputation on strength, control, and impeccable judgment. Every decision he makes is scrutinized. Every alliance he forms is analyzed. And now he's made you his wife, which means every mistake you make reflects on him. The words hit like fists. Clara forced herself to breathe normally, to keep her face calm. I don't intend to make mistakes, Your Grace. Intentions are lovely, Lady Vivian said, but this world doesn't care about intentions. It cares about results. And connections, Elise added, which you don't have. No family support, no established friendships, no history with any of the important houses. She tilted her head, studying Clara like a bug under glass. You're completely alone here. Don't you find that terrifying? Yes. God, yes. But Clara didn't say that. Instead, she reached for her teacup again, took a slow sip, and met Elise's eyes over the rim. I find it clarifying, she said quietly. When you have nothing to lose, you can't be threatened with loss. Something flickered in Elise's expression. Surprise, maybe, or calculation. The Duchess laughed. It was a cold sound, brittle as ice breaking. Oh, my dear, everyone has something to lose. You just haven't figured out what yours is yet. But boss. The breakfast lasted another hour. By the time Clara was finally released, her head was pounding and her jaw ached from forcing smiles. She made it halfway back to her rooms before her legs started shaking. She ducked into an empty corridor, pressing her back against the wall and closing her eyes. Her whole body felt like it was vibrating with suppressed panic. Every word at that table had been a test, every smile a blade, and Clara had no idea if she'd passed or failed. Everyone has something to lose. The Duchess was right. Clara had thought being expendable made her safe, but she'd been wrong. She had everything to lose, her position, her family's security, whatever fragile protection Lucien's name offered. And these women knew it. They could see it in her eyes, smell it on her skin like blood in the water. Lady Clara, she spun. A man stood a few feet away, dressed in the palace guard uniform, older, maybe 40, with a scar across his left cheekbone and eyes that had seen too much. I'm Captain Thorne, he said. The Grand Duke sent me to find you. He'd like to see you in his study. Clara's stomach clenched. Now? If you're available, my lady. It wasn't really a question. Clara nodded, pushing herself off the wall. Her legs felt steadier now, though her hands were still shaking slightly. She clasped them together to hide it. Captain Thorne led her through corridors she didn't recognize, past rooms she'd never seen. The palace was enormous, a labyrinth designed to confuse and disorient. Clara tried to memorize the route, but after the third turn, she was completely lost. Finally, they stopped outside the same heavy wooden doors from last night. Thorne knocked once, waited for Lucien's voice from inside, then opened the door and gestured Clara through. Lucien stood by the window, reading a document. He didn't look up as Clara entered, just kept scanning the page with that focused intensity he seemed to bring to everything. Captain Thorne closed the door behind her, and suddenly they were alone. Clara waited. The silence stretched. Finally, Lucien set down the document and turned to face her. How was breakfast with the Duchess? So he'd known. Of course he'd known. Educational, Clara said. Something that might have been amusement touched his expression. That's one word for it. What did they want? To establish that I don't belong here. Clara was surprised by how steady her voice came out. To make sure I understand I'm being watched. To see if I'd break under pressure. And did you? Not yet. Lucien studied her for a moment. Then he moved to his desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a small leather folder. He held it out to Clara. She took it cautiously. Inside were papers, documents, letters, what looked like financial records. She scanned the first page and felt her breath catch. It was a complete accounting of her father's business. Everything. The partnerships, the shipping contracts, the warehouse fires. And there, in careful detail, the evidence her father had died trying to gather. proof that his partners had systematically stolen from him, falsified records, and destroyed his property to hide their crimes. "Where did you get this?" Claire's voice came out barely above a whisper. "I've had investigators working on it since your father's death," Lucian said. "It took 3 years to compile everything, but it's all there. Names, dates, money trails. Enough to reopen the case and destroy everyone involved." Clara stared at him. "Why?" "Because you deserve to know the truth. And because the men who destroyed your family are still operating in this city. 2 of them are nobles. 1 is a judge. They've built their current fortunes on the money they stole from your father." Lucian leaned against his desk. "I thought you might want to decide what happens to them." Clara's hands were shaking again, but for a different reason now. She looked down at the papers, at the proof her father had died searching for. Justice. Revenge. The chance to make them pay for what they'd taken. But there was something else in Lucian's expression. Something calculating. "What do you want in return?" she asked. "Nothing you're not already giving me," Lucian said. "But I need you to understand something, Clara. Information is power in this palace. The ability to destroy someone's life with a single letter, to ruin their reputation with evidence they thought was buried, that's the currency we deal in here. And I'm offering to teach you how to use it." Clara's throat felt tight. "You want to turn me into one of them?" "I want you to survive," Lucian corrected. "Those women at breakfast today, they weren't just testing you. They were deciding whether you're worth recruiting or destroying. And if you show up to court functions defenseless and ignorant, they'll tear you apart." He gestured to the folder. "This is your first weapon. Use it or don't. But understand that in this world, the only thing more dangerous than having enemies is having nothing to fight back with." Clara looked down at the papers again. Her father's ruin. Her family's destruction. 3 years of hunger and shame, and watching her mother sell everything they had left just to survive. And now, the chance to make it right. Or the chance to become exactly what she'd been running from. "What would you do?" she asked. "If this was your family?" Lucien's expression didn't change. "I'd burn them to the ground. Slowly. Make sure everyone knew exactly why they were being destroyed." He paused. "But I'm not a good person, Clara. I've never pretended to be." She almost laughed at that. The Grand Duke, the most powerful man in the Empire, casually admitting he was a monster, as if it was just a fact, no more significant than his height or eye color. But he was offering her a choice. That was something. More than anyone else in this palace had offered. Clara closed the folder. "I need time to think about it." Lucien nodded. "Take all the time you need, but understand, the moment you use that information, everything changes. You'll have shown the court you're not helpless, which makes you either an ally worth having or a threat worth eliminating." He straightened. "There's no neutral ground here. You either fight or you die." The words should have terrified her. Maybe they did. But underneath the fear was something else, something harder and sharper. The part of her that had survived 3 years of social exile. The part that had stood in front of the Duchess this morning and refused to break. The part that was tired of being prey. "I understand," Clara said. "Good." Lucien moved toward the door. "Captain Thorne will escort you back to your rooms. You have a fitting this afternoon with the palace seamstress. And tomorrow night, there's a reception for the Andorian ambassador. You'll attend with me." He was already giving orders, already moving to the next task. As if this conversation, this offer to teach her how to destroy people, was just another item on his schedule. Clara should have been horrified, should have been sickened by how casually he discussed ruining lives. But instead she found herself thinking about her father's face when the creditors came. Her mother's hands, raw from washing clothes they used to have servants handle. Her sisters, thin and quiet, learning too young that the world didn't care if you were innocent. "Lucienne!" He stopped, his hand on the door, turned to look at her. Clara met his eyes. "When I decide what to do with that information, when I choose whether to use it or not, it won't be because you told me to. It'll be my decision, mine alone." Something flickered in his expression, not quite respect, but close. "I wouldn't expect anything less." He left. Clara stood there alone, holding a folder full of weapons she wasn't sure she was ready to use. The fitting that afternoon was another lesson in humiliation disguised as courtesy. The seamstress was a thin woman with pins stuck in her collar and eyes that saw everything. She circled Clara like a predator, measuring, adjusting, criticizing. The dress she was making, for tomorrow night's reception, hung on a form nearby, all midnight blue silk and intricate beadwork. Beautiful. Expensive. Absolutely not designed for someone like Clara. "Arms up," the seamstress commanded. Clara obeyed. "Higher. No, not like that. Haven't you ever been fitted for a gown before?" "Not one like this," Clara admitted. The seamstress made a sound that might have been disgust or pity. Hard to tell. "Well, you'll need to learn. The Grand Duke's wife can't appear at court functions looking like a merchant's daughter dressed up for festival." The insult was casual, automatic. Clara bit the inside of her cheek and said nothing. The fitting took 2 hours. By the time it was done, Claire's back ached and her pride was in tatters. The seamstress sent her away with a list of instructions about how to walk in the dress, how to sit, how to stand, as if Clara was a performing animal being trained for a show. She made it back to her rooms and found the young servant from this morning waiting, the one who'd warned her about the dress color. "My lady," the girl curtsied, "I've drawn a bath for you, and there's tea if you'd like it." Clara stared at her. Kindness was so rare in this place that she'd almost forgotten what it looked like. "Thank you," she said quietly. "What's your name?" The girl looked surprised. "Anne, my lady." "Thank you, Anne." Anne ducked her head, but Clara caught the small smile before it disappeared. I'll be in the next room if you need anything." She fled. Clara stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of the day pressing down on her shoulders. Then she went to take the bath, letting the hot water ease muscles she hadn't realized were knotted with tension. She was still soaking when she heard voices from the bedroom. Anne talking to someone. Clara couldn't make out the words, but there was urgency in the tone. She got out, dried off quickly, and pulled on a robe. When she emerged, Anne was standing by the door looking pale. "What is it?" Anne's hands twisted together. "I'm sorry, my lady. I was told to inform you that Lady Corvain has requested your presence at a gathering tomorrow afternoon, before the reception." She hesitated. "She said it would be wise for you to attend." A command dressed as an invitation. Clara's jaw tightened. "Who told you to deliver this message?" "One of Lady Corvain's servants, my lady. She was very insistent." Insistent. Right. Clara could imagine exactly how that conversation had gone. Elise Corvain didn't ask, she demanded, and servants who didn't obey found themselves reassigned or dismissed. "Tell her I'll consider it," Clara said. Anne's eyes widened. "But my lady, Tell her I'll consider it," Clara repeated, more firmly this time. "And Anne? From now on, if anyone tries to bully you into delivering messages to me, you come to me first. Understood?" Anne stared at her like she'd just sprouted wings. Then she curtsied, low and genuine. "Yes, my lady, thank you." After she left, Clara stood at the window, looking out at the gardens below. Somewhere in this palace, Elise Corvain was planning her next move. The Duchess of Halvern was probably reporting back to whoever had sent her to test Clara this morning. And Lucien was doing whatever it was he did when he wasn't coldly offering to teach his wife how to destroy her enemies. Clara thought about the folder hidden in her dresser drawer, the evidence that could ruin 3 powerful men. The weapon Lucien had given her. You either fight or you die. She'd spent 3 years trying to survive by being invisible, by enduring humiliation and keeping her head down. It hadn't worked. Her family was still ruined, her father was still dead, and now she was trapped in a palace full of people who wanted her gone. Maybe it was time to stop hiding. Maybe it was time to show them exactly what happened when you backed a desperate woman into a corner. That night, Clara couldn't sleep again. She lay in the enormous bed, staring at shadows on the ceiling, her mind racing through everything that had happened. The breakfast, the folder, Elise's summons. Every interaction felt like a chess move, and Clara was still learning the rules. Around midnight, she heard the door to the outer chamber open. Footsteps, deliberate and unhurried. Then Lucien appeared in the doorway, still fully dressed. "You're awake," he observed. "So are you." He moved into the room and Clara noticed he was carrying something, a small wooden box. He set it on the table by the window and gestured for her to join him. Clara got up, pulling her robe tighter, and crossed to where he stood. Up close, she could see he looked tired. Not weak. Lucien never looked weak, but worn, like he'd been dealing with something exhausting. "What's in the box?" she asked. Instead of answering, he opened it. Inside were papers. Letters, Clara realized. Dozens of them. She picked one up carefully, unfolded it, and started reading. It was a threat. A detailed, vicious threat describing exactly what would happen if Lucian didn't withdraw his support for the Emperor's new trade reforms. It was signed with the seal of House Ventrese. Clara looked up. "How many of these do you get?" "These are just from the last month," Lucien said. "I have 3 more boxes in my office." She stared at him. "And you just... what? Ignore them?" "I categorize them. The ones that are purely noise, I discard. The ones that contain actual threats, kidnapping attempts, assassination plots, blackmail schemes, I forward to my security staff." He picked up one of the letters, scanned it briefly. "The ones that reveal useful information about who's aligned with whom, I keep for leverage." Clara set down the letter she'd been holding. "Why are you showing me this?" Lucian leaned against the table. "Because tomorrow night, you're going to walk into a room full of people who would celebrate if you dropped dead. And I need you to understand that this is normal. This is what power looks like. Death threats and poison and smiles that hide knives." "That's supposed to make me feel better?" "It's supposed to make you realistic." He gestured to the box. "Every person in that reception tomorrow night has enemies, every single one. The difference between surviving and dying isn't whether you're attacked. It's whether you see the attack coming." Clara's throat felt tight. "I'm not like you, Lucien. I wasn't raised for this. I don't know how to—" "Neither was I," he interrupted quietly. She stared at him. "What?" Lucien was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different, flatter, emptier. "My father died when I was 14, poisoned by a rival house. They made it look like an accident, but everyone knew. And suddenly, I was the Grand Duke, with a title I didn't understand and responsibilities I wasn't prepared for. The court expected me to fail. They were already dividing up my territories, planning how to carve up my inheritance." He met her eyes. "So I learned, fast, brutally, because the alternative was death." Clara had never heard him talk about his past before. Hell, she'd never heard him talk about anything personal. It felt like looking at a wound he usually kept covered. "How did you survive?" she asked. "I stopped trying to be good." Lucien's expression was unreadable. "I focused on being effective instead, on being so dangerous that attacking me became more costly than leaving me alone." He paused. "It worked, but it also meant becoming exactly what everyone already thought I was. A monster." The word hung between them. Clara thought about the Duchess's accusations, Elise's calculated coldness, the way every noble in the palace looked at Lucien with a mixture of fear and hate. "Do you regret it?" she asked. Lucien considered the question. "No. Regret is a luxury I can't afford." He straightened. "But I don't expect you to become what I am." "You're asking the wrong question, Clara. It's not about being like me. It's about deciding who you want to be in this world. What you're willing to do to protect the people who depend on you." Clara looked at the box of threats. At this man who'd survived years of assassination attempts and political warfare. Who'd turned himself into something cold and hard because that was the only way to stay alive. "My mother and sisters," she said quietly. "Are they safe?" "Yes. I moved them to a house on the edge of the city, small but secure. They have guards I trust." Lucien's voice was matter-of-fact. "No one will touch them without going through me first." Relief flooded through her so hard she almost swayed. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. It's strategic. Your family is leverage against you, which makes them leverage against me." He moved toward the door. "But Clara, the threats don't stop at your family. They'll come after your reputation, your sanity, your sense of self. They'll try to make you doubt everything, and if you let them see weakness, they'll use it to destroy you." He was almost out the door when Clara spoke again. "The men who ruined my father." Lucien stopped, turned. Clara's hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. "I want to know everything, who they are now, what they're protecting, what they're afraid of losing. I want to know where to cut so it hurts most." Something flickered in Lucien's eyes. Not quite approval, but close. "I'll have the full dossier sent to you tomorrow morning." "And then what?" "Then you decide." He held her gaze. "But whatever you choose, make sure it's a decision you can live with. Because once you start down this road, There's no going back to who you were before. He left. Clara stood alone in the lamplight, feeling like she'd just crossed a line she hadn't even known was there. Tomorrow she'd attend Elise Corvain's gathering. Tomorrow night she'd walk into the ambassador's reception on Lucien's arm. And somewhere between now and then, she'd decide whether to use the weapons he'd given her, whether to stop being the victim and start being something else entirely. The thought should have terrified her, but instead, standing there in the darkness of the Grand Duke's palace, Clara felt something unfamiliar burning in her chest. Not fear, power. The dossiers arrived with breakfast. 3 thick folders, each one bound in leather and sealed with wax that bore Lucien's mark. Clara sat at the small table in her sitting room, staring at them while her tea went cold. Anne hovered nearby, pretending to organize books that were already perfectly arranged. Clara broke the first seal. Inside were documents, photographs, financial records. Everything about the man who'd stolen her father's life. Lord Marcus Hailsham, currently serving as a judge in the imperial courts, married to a duchess's niece. 2 children, both at prestigious academies. His fortune had tripled in the last 3 years, all of it built on money he'd embezzled from her father's shipping company before burning the evidence. The photograph showed a fat man with soft hands and a smile that had probably charmed half the court. He looked comfortable, safe, like someone who'd never faced consequences for anything in his entire privileged life. Clara's hands tightened on the folder until her knuckles went white. The second folder held similar details about Richard Vane, now a successful merchant with contracts throughout the empire. He'd been her father's partner, his closest friend, the man who'd sat at their dinner table and praised her mother's cooking while he systematically drained their accounts. The third was Lord Peter Corinth, a minor noble who'd provided the political cover for the whole scheme. He'd bribed the investigators, falsified the court documents, and made sure her father's case was dismissed as simple mismanagement. 3 men. 3 lives built on her family's ruin. Clara's breath came faster. Her vision tunneled until all she could see were those smiling faces, those careful lies documented in black ink. The evidence was damning, complete. Lucien had given her everything she needed to destroy them. Anne's voice broke through the haze. "My lady, you're bleeding." Clara looked down. She dug her nails so deep into her palms that blood welled between her fingers. She unclenched her fist slowly, watching red drops fall onto the pristine tablecloth. Anne brought water and bandages without being asked. While she cleaned Clara's hands, her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "They say the gathering at Lady Corvain's estate starts at 2. Everyone who matters will be there." Clara met her eyes. "Everyone who wants to see if I'll break, you mean?" Anne's silence was answer enough. After she left, Clara sat with the dossiers spread around her like weapons waiting to be picked up. Lucien had said this was about deciding who she wanted to be, what she was willing to do. But that wasn't quite right. Clara had already decided something last night when she'd asked for these files. The decision now was simpler and more brutal. How much blood she was willing to spill to get what she wanted. Her father had believed in justice, in the law, in doing the right thing even when it cost him everything. And he died alone in a prison cell while the men who destroyed him grew fat on stolen wealth. Maybe justice was for people who could afford it, people who had power and protection and the luxury of moral high ground. Clara wasn't one of those people anymore. Elise Corvain's gathering was held in a private salon overlooking the palace gardens. Afternoon sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating a dozen women arranged like pieces on a chessboard. Every single one of them was titled, wealthy, and looking at Clara like she was a stain on their expensive furniture. Elise rose to greet her, all poisonous grace in pale pink silk. "Lady Clara, how wonderful that you could join us. We were just discussing the upcoming charity gala for the Veterans Fund." Clara recognized the trap immediately. The charity gala was the Empire's most prestigious social event. Attendance was by invitation only, and the guest list was controlled by a committee of the most powerful women at court. Women like the ones in this room. "How thoughtful of you all," Clara said. Elise's smile sharpened. "Yes. Well, it's so important to support our soldiers. The committee is always looking for new members, women with the right connections and social standing to help raise funds." She paused delicately. "Though, of course, that requires a certain Background: a proven ability to move in these circles. Translation: someone like you doesn't belong here and never will. Lady Vivian leaned forward from her position on a cream settee. I'm sure Lady Clara understands. Not everyone is suited for this kind of work. It requires years of experience, established relationships. She tilted her head. Tell me, dear, what charitable causes did your family support? Before everything fell apart, I mean. The room went silent. Every eye fixed on Clara, waiting to see if she'd flinch. Clara thought about her father teaching her to read ledgers when she was 8, her mother organizing food distributions for dock workers' families every winter, the scholarship fund they'd maintained for children who couldn't afford schooling. All of it gone now. Destroyed along with everything else. My family believed in supporting people who actually needed help, Clara said quietly. Not just causes that made us look good at parties. Lady Vivian's eyes went cold. How quaint. Elise stepped in smoothly. Of course, we all admire that sentiment, but surely you understand there's a difference between personal charity and actually moving policy. Influencing how the empire allocates resources. That requires access to people in power. She settled into her chair like a cat claiming territory. Which brings me to why I invited you here, Clara. I wanted to offer you some advice, friendly advice, between women who want to help each other succeed. Nothing about Elise's expression looked friendly. You're in a very precarious position, she continued. Married to the most powerful man in the empire, but with absolutely no foundation to stand on. No allies, no experience, no understanding of how things work here. She picked up her teacup with elegant precision. People are already saying you won't last 6 months, that the Grand Duke will realize his mistake and quietly send you away. Clara's pulse hammered in her throat, but she kept her face smooth. And you're offering to help me prove them wrong? I'm offering you a chance to survive, Elise said. Join our circle. Let us guide you. We can teach you how to navigate court politics, introduce you to the right people, help you build the connections you desperately need. She leaned forward slightly. All we ask in return is your loyalty, your friendship, and occasionally information about your husband's plans. There it was, the real offer beneath the pretense of kindness. They wanted to turn her into a spy. Clara thought about Lucien's warning, about the box of death threats and the casual way he'd explained that everyone in this palace wanted something from him, from her. That's very generous, Clara said slowly, but I'm afraid I can't help you. Elise's smile froze. I'm sorry? My husband doesn't discuss his plans with me. Clara met her eyes steadily. He made it very clear when we married that I'm not to involve myself in politics or alliances. So even if I wanted to help you, I'd have nothing useful to offer. It was a lie. Lucien had been teaching her exactly how politics worked in this palace, but Elise didn't need to know that. Lady Vivian laughed, sharp and cutting. How convenient. The Grand Duke keeps his wife in the dark like a child. No, Clara said, and her voice came out harder than she'd intended. He keeps me out of danger, because unlike you, I'm not trying to play games I don't understand. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Elise's expression went from sugar to ice in a heartbeat. Games, she repeated softly. Is that what you think this is? Clara's survival instinct screamed at her to back down, apologize, smooth this over before it got worse. But something else pushed through the fear. Something that had been building since yesterday morning's breakfast. Since 3 years of watching her family starve, while people like this lived in obscene luxury. I think you're all fighting for scraps of power while pretending it's about duty or charity or whatever pretty lie helps you sleep at night, Clara said. And I think you're angry because the Grand Duke married someone you can't control or intimidate into doing what you want. Silence. Absolute, suffocating silence. Then Elise stood. The movement was fluid and controlled, but Clara could see fury burning behind her perfect composure. I tried to be kind to you, she said, and each word was a blade. I offered you friendship, protection, a way to survive in a world you clearly don't understand. She took a step closer. But if you want to make enemies instead, Clara, then let me be very clear about what that means. You have no family to protect you, no wealth to shield you, no experience to guide you. All you have is a husband who married you because you're disposable. And when he's done with you, when you've outlived whatever usefulness he saw in you, we'll be waiting. Clara's heart hammered so hard she could feel it in her throat, but she didn't look away. Then I guess we'll see what happens when you try, she said quietly. For a moment she thought Elise might actually strike her. Her hand twitched, her face flushed with rage barely contained beneath layers of breeding and self-control. Then she smiled. It was the most terrifying thing Clara had ever seen. Yes, Elise said softly. We will. She turned to the other women. I think we're done here. Lady Clara was just leaving. Clara stood. Her legs felt unsteady, but she made it to the door without stumbling. Just before she left, she looked back at the room full of women who'd just become her enemies. Thank you for the tea, she said. It was educational. Then she walked out, her spine straight, her hands steady, and waited until she was 3 corridors away before she pressed herself against a wall and tried to remember how to breathe. What had she just done? What the hell had she just done? She'd declared war. On Elise Corvain. On the most powerful social circle at court. On women who could destroy her reputation with a whisper and ruin her life before dinner. Clara's hands started shaking, then her whole body. She slid down the wall until she was sitting on the marble floor, gasping like she'd run a mile. A shadow fell across her. She looked up and found Captain Thorne standing there, his scarred face impassive. The Grand Duke wants to see you, he said. Now. Lucian's study was empty when Clara arrived. She stood in the center of the room, trying to compose herself, trying to figure out how to explain what she'd just done. The door opened. Lucien entered, followed by an older man in expensive robes who radiated authority. Clara recognized him from portraits. Lord Chancellor Davrin, the Emperor's chief advisor. The Chancellor's eyes landed on Clara, sharp and assessing. So this is the girl causing all the commotion. Lucien's expression gave nothing away. Lady Clara, this is Lord Chancellor Davrin. He came to warn me that you've just made a very dangerous enemy. Clara's stomach dropped. Word had spread that fast? The Chancellor settled into a chair without being invited. Lady Corvain sent a message to my office 20 minutes ago, demanding that I convene a disciplinary council to address your disrespect toward members of the court. She paused. She's also threatening to withdraw her family's support for the Emperor's infrastructure reforms, unless something is done about your behavior. Clara felt the room tilt. Oh God. She'd threatened policy, real policy that affected the Empire, all because she couldn't keep her mouth shut. I see, Lucien said, and his voice was completely neutral. What did my wife say to provoke this response? The Chancellor's eyebrow rose. According to Lady Corvain, she accused several noble women of playing games and implied they were motivated by greed rather than duty. Lucien looked at Clara. His expression was impossible to read. Is that accurate? Clara's throat felt like sand. More or less, yes. Silence. The Chancellor waited. Lucien studied Clara like she was a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. Then he turned back to the Chancellor. Tell Lady Corvain that my wife speaks for herself, not for me. If she has a grievance about Clara's behavior, she can address it directly. I won't discipline my wife for having opinions. The Chancellor's expression shifted slightly. Surprise? Maybe. You realize she's threatening to pull support from the reforms. That could delay the entire project by months. Then you'll have to find other support, Lucien said calmly. I won't set a precedent of allowing nobles to dictate how my household operates. But you'll let her threaten imperial policy, the Chancellor countered, over a personal insult. Lucien's eyes went cold. What I won't do is teach my wife that backing down to bullies is the price of survival. If Lady Corvain wants to play politics with infrastructure funding, that's her choice. But she doesn't get to use it as leverage to control my family. The room temperature seemed to drop. The Chancellor studied Lucien for a long moment, then shifted his gaze to Clara. You're very fortunate in your husband, Lady Clara. Most men would have handed you over to keep the peace. Clara found her voice. I didn't ask him to protect me. No, the Chancellor agreed, which makes it more interesting. He stood, brushing invisible dust from his robes. I'll inform Lady Corvain that her complaint has been noted, but that the Grand Duke declines to intervene. She won't be pleased. She rarely is, Lucien said. After the Chancellor left, silence filled the study. Clara stood there waiting for Lucien to tell her she'd been reckless, stupid, dangerous, that she'd put his political alliances at risk for the sake of wounded pride. Instead, he walked to the window and looked out at the gardens. What did Elise offer you? Information, Clara said quietly. Guidance, protection, in exchange for spying on you. And you refused. Yes. Why? Because I'm not going to betray you. The words came out more vehement than she'd intended. You gave me a choice about those dossiers. You've protected my family. You've treated me like I have value even when you made it clear I'm expendable. I won't repay that by selling you out to people who want to use me. Lucian turned to face her. There was something in his expression she couldn't name. Not quite approval, not quite surprise. Something harder and more complicated. You just made enemies of the 12 most influential women at court, he said. They'll come after you now. Rumors, social exclusion, sabotage. They'll try to isolate you completely. I know. And you did it anyway. I did. He crossed the room until he was standing close enough that Clara had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. That was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Probably both, Clara admitted. Something that might have been a smile touched the corner of his mouth. It vanished almost immediately. The reception tonight is going to be worse now. Everyone will have heard about your confrontation with Elise. They'll be watching to see how you handle the pressure. Then I'll handle it, Clara said, with more confidence than she felt. Lucian studied her face for a long moment. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small box. He opened it, revealing a necklace. Diamonds and sapphires arranged in a pattern that probably cost more than Clara's entire former life. This belonged to my mother, he said. She wore it to every major court function. It was her way of reminding people that she belonged there, regardless of what anyone thought. He held it out to Clara. Wear it tonight. Clara stared at the necklace, then at Lucian. I can't accept this. You can. You will. He placed the box in her hands. You declared war this afternoon, Clara. Now you need to look like someone who can win it. The reception for the Andorian ambassador was everything Clara had dreaded, and worse. The ballroom blazed with light from 1,000 candles, reflecting off mirrors and gold leaf until the whole space felt like the inside of a jewel. Hundreds of nobles clustered in groups, their laughter brittle and their eyes sharp. An orchestra played something complicated and beautiful that Clara didn't recognize. She stood at the entrance on Lucian's arm, wearing the midnight blue dress and his mother's necklace, and felt every eye in the room turn toward her. The whispers started immediately. A wave of sound that rippled through the crowd like wind through grass. Lucian's hand settled on her lower back, steady and grounding. Remember what I told you. Walk like you own this room. Don't apologize for taking up space. Clara lifted her chin and walked forward. The crowd parted. Some people nodded in greeting, their faces carefully neutral. Others stared with open hostility. Clara recognized several of the women from Elise's gathering. They looked at her like predators who'd just spotted wounded prey. Near the center of the room, the Duchess of Halvern held court with a cluster of older nobles. She caught Clara's eye and smiled. It was the smile of someone who knew a secret and was waiting for the perfect moment to use it. Lucian guided Clara through the crowd, introducing her to various diplomats and officials. Most were polite. Some were actively warm, either because they liked Lucian or because they were smart enough to recognize that insulting his wife would be dangerous. Then they reached the ambassador himself. Lord Henrik of Andor was a tall man with graying hair and eyes that missed nothing. He greeted Lucienne with genuine warmth and Clara with careful courtesy. Lady Clara, I've heard a great deal about you in just the past few hours. Clara's stomach clenched. All of it terrible, I'm sure. Henrik's expression shifted slightly. Actually, I heard you stood up to a room full of vultures and refused to be intimidated. He glanced at Lucienne. Your husband has excellent taste in allies. She's my wife, not my ally, Lucian said. There was something in his tone Clara couldn't quite identify. Henrik smiled. In my experience, the best marriages are both. They talked for a few more minutes about trade agreements and diplomatic protocols. Clara mostly listened, trying to absorb everything being said. She was so focused on the conversation that she almost didn't notice when Elise Corvain appeared at the ambassador's elbow. Lord Henrik, how wonderful to see you again. Elise's voice was honey over poison. I hope you're enjoying the reception. Very much, Henrik said pleasantly. I was just meeting Lady Clara. Elise's smile could have cut glass. Yes, we've met. In fact, we had a lovely conversation just this afternoon. She turned to Clara. I hope you've been thinking about what we discussed. I have, Clara said. My answer hasn't changed. Elise's eyes glittered. How unfortunate. She looked back at Henrik. You know, the Andorian trade delegation will need support from the noble houses to succeed. It would be a shame if political complications made that difficult. The threat was barely veiled. Clara felt Lucien's hand tighten slightly on her back, but his expression remained calm. Henrik's smile didn't change, but his voice went cold. Lady Corvain, in Andor we have a saying, those who threaten their allies soon find themselves without friends. He paused. I would hate to see that happen to such an influential family. Elise's face flushed. I wasn't threatening anyone. I was simply observing that political harmony requires cooperation from all parties. Of course, Henrik said pleasantly, which is why I'm sure you'll support the delegation, regardless of any personal disagreements you might have with Lady Clara. It was a masterful deflection. Elise's smile froze in place while she tried to figure out how to respond without looking petty or vindictive. Before she could recover, Henrik turned to Clara. Lady Clara, I would be honored if you would join me for the first dance. If your husband permits, of course. Lucien's expression was unreadable. Go ahead. Henrik offered his arm. Clara took it, her heart hammering, and let him lead her onto the dance floor. As they began to move, Henrik spoke quietly. You've made quite an impression for someone who's been at court less than 3 days. That's one way to put it, Clara said. Henrik laughed softly. Elise Corvain is dangerous, but she's also predictable. She relies on social pressure and political connections to get what she wants. If you refuse to be pressured and build your own connections, she has very little actual power over you. Easier said than done. True, but you have something she doesn't. Henrik's eyes flicked toward where Lucien stood watching them. A husband who actually supports you instead of using you. Don't underestimate how rare that is in this court. The music swelled. They turned in perfect rhythm, and Clara felt dozens of eyes tracking their movement. When the dance ended, Henrik bowed over her hand. Welcome to court politics, Lady Clara. Try not to let it destroy you. He walked away, leaving Clara standing alone in the center of the ballroom. She scanned the crowd, looking for Lucien, and found him in conversation with 2 men she didn't recognize. Before she could move, someone grabbed her elbow. Hard. Clara turned and found herself face to face with a young man dressed in imperial purple. A prince, she realized with a jolt. One of the emperor's younger sons. Lady Clara. His voice was slurred slightly. Drunk, maybe, or just careless. I've been wanting to meet you, Your Highness. Clara tried to pull her arm free gently. The prince's grip tightened. Everyone's talking about you. The merchant girl who thinks she can play in the big leagues. He leaned closer, and his breath smelled like wine. Tell me, how does it feel knowing you're just a placeholder until someone better comes along? Clara's pulse spiked. The prince was swaying slightly, his eyes unfocused, definitely drunk, and surrounded by people who were watching this interaction with barely concealed glee. I think you've had too much wine, Your Highness. Perhaps I should what? The prince's voice rose. Take advice from a nobody? From a girl whose father died in prison like a common criminal? The room went silent. Every conversation stopped. Every eye turned to watch. Clara's vision tunneled. She could feel her chest tightening, her breathing going shallow. This was it. The moment where everything fell apart. The moment where she proved every single one of them right about not belonging here. Then a hand landed on the prince's shoulder, Lucien's hand. Your Highness. His voice was quiet but carried across the entire ballroom. You're drunk, and you're embarrassing yourself in front of the Andorian ambassador. The prince spun around, nearly losing his balance. Grand Duke, how nice of you to join us. We were just discussing your fascinating choice of bride. Lucien's expression could have frozen fire. Let go of my wife. The prince glanced down at his hand, still gripping Clara's elbow, then back up at Lucien. And if I don't? Then I'll remove your hand myself. And then I'll have a conversation with your father about whether princes who can't control themselves at diplomatic functions should be allowed to attend them. The threat hung in the air like a blade. The prince's face went from red to white. His hand opened, releasing Clara's arm. You can't speak to me like that, he said, but his voice shook. I just did, Lucien said calmly. Now apologize to my wife and leave before you make this worse. The prince stared at him, then at Clara. then at the hundreds of nobles watching this entire disaster unfold. He stumbled away without apologizing. The crowd parted for him like water around a stone. Lucienne turned to Clara. "Are you hurt?" Clara shook her head. She couldn't speak. Her whole body was shaking with adrenaline and suppressed panic. Lucien's hand found hers. His grip was steady, grounding. "We're leaving." He led her through the crowd, past the whispers and stares, and barely concealed shock. Out of the ballroom, through corridors that blurred together, until they reached his study and he closed the door behind them. Only then did Clara's legs give out. She sank into a chair, gulping air, her hands shaking so badly she had to press them between her knees to keep them still. Lucienne poured something from a decanter and pressed the glass into her hands. "Drink." Clara drank. It burned going down, but it steadied her. "I'm sorry," she said. "I should have handled that better. I should have—" "You did fine," Lucienne interrupted. The prince was drunk and belligerent. There was no good way to handle that situation. "But now everyone thinks I just humiliated a prince to protect you," Lucienne finished, "which is exactly what I intended them to think." Clara stared at him. "Why?" "Because you're my wife. And if I let people attack you without consequences, it tells the entire court that you're unprotected. Vulnerable." He leaned against his desk. "Now they know that touching you means dealing with me. But it was a prince. You just threatened a member of the imperial family." "Yes," Lucienne said calmly. "I did." Clara's hands tightened on the glass. "You can't just— There have to be consequences, political ramifications." "Probably." Lucienne shrugged. "I'll deal with them." "Why would you do that?" Clara's voice cracked. "Why would you risk your position for me when you've made it clear I'm just a strategic asset?" Lucienne was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was different, quieter, rougher around the edges. "Because watching that drunk idiot put his hands on you made me want to break every bone in his body. And I realized that at some point between our wedding and tonight, you stopped being just a strategic asset." He met her eyes. "I don't know what you are now, but you're not nothing, not to me." The words hit Clara like a physical blow. She set down the glass before she dropped it. "Lucienne, The door burst open. Captain Thorne stood there, his face grim. "We have a problem. One of the servants found something in Lady Clara's rooms." He held up a small vial. "Poison. Hidden in her vanity." Clara's blood turned to ice. "Someone tried to poison me?" Thorne's expression was carved from stone. "Not tried. They placed it there to be found during the search." "What search?" Lucien's voice went deadly quiet. "The one the Empress just ordered. She's claiming she received an anonymous tip that Lady Clara is plotting against the imperial family." Thorne paused. "The poison is supposed to be proof." The room tilted. Clara gripped the arm of her chair to keep from falling. Lucienne's face went blank. The kind of blank that meant he was thinking through 10 different scenarios and calculating the fastest way to destroy everyone involved. "When?" he said flatly. "Search started 5 minutes ago. They'll find the vial within the hour." Clara's mind raced. This was it. The attack she'd been waiting for. Not subtle rumors or social pressure. A direct attempt to destroy her using the Empress herself as a weapon. And it would work. Of course it would work. She was nobody. No connections, no proof of innocence, no way to fight back against an accusation from the Empress. She looked at Lucienne. His expression was cold calculation, already planning his next move. Probably already deciding how to cut her loose to protect himself. Clara stood. Her legs felt unsteady, but she made them work. "I need to see my family," she said quietly, "before they arrest me. Please." Lucienne's eyes snapped to hers. "They're not arresting you." "They will. You know they will. The Empress doesn't make accusations like this unless she's certain." Clara's voice was steady, despite the panic clawing at her chest. "So please, let me see my mother and sisters one more time before—" "Before what?" Lucien's voice cut through her spiral. "Before I let them destroy you? Before I hand you over to save myself?" "Yes." He crossed to her in 2 strides. His hands gripped her shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Listen to me very carefully," he said, and his voice was steel wrapped in ice. "I don't care if the Empress herself is behind this. I don't care if the Emperor demands your head on a platter. You're my wife. which means anyone who tries to destroy you goes through me first. He paused. All of them. At once. And I will burn this entire palace to the ground before I let them touch you. Clara stared at him. This wasn't strategy anymore. This wasn't cold calculation. This was something raw and fierce and absolutely terrifying. Lucian turned to Thorn. Send word to the Empress that I'm invoking marital protection. Any accusations against my wife go through me before they reach the courts. Thorn's eyebrows rose. That's unprecedented. Then we're making precedent. Lucian's voice was flat. Do it. Now. Thorn left. Lucian looked back at Clara. Someone in this palace tried to frame you for treason tonight, which means they've decided you're enough of a threat to destroy regardless of the political cost. He reached up, adjusting the necklace still hanging around her throat. So we're going to find out who, and then we're going to show them exactly what happens when they mistake mercy for weakness. Clara's hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't fear. It was something else, something darker and harder. The dossiers, she said quietly. The men who destroyed my father. What about them? I've made my decision. She met Lucien's eyes. I want to use them. All of them. I want those men to lose everything the way my family did. Lucien's expression didn't change. You're sure? Clara thought about Lord Hailsham's comfortable smile, about Richard Vane's successful merchant empire, about Lord Corinth's political connections, about 3 men living lives built on stolen wealth while her father rotted in a grave and her mother sold jewelry to buy bread. I'm sure. Then we start tomorrow, Lucian said. But tonight we deal with whoever tried to frame you. He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her in a gesture that felt protective and possessive all at once. And Clara? When we find them, I'm going to let you decide what happens to them too. Clara pressed her face against his chest, breathing in the scent of expensive cologne, and something underneath that was just him. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Her whole body felt like it was vibrating with suppressed fury and terror and something that might have been hope. She'd crossed a line tonight, multiple lines. There was no going back now to who she'd been before, but maybe that was the point. Maybe survival in this world meant becoming someone new, someone harder, someone willing to fight back instead of enduring, someone who could stand beside the Grand Duke and not flinch when the knives came out. The study door opened again. This time it was a messenger, young and terrified, holding a sealed letter. From the Empress, he gasped. For the Grand Duke! Lucien took it, broke the seal, read the contents. His expression went colder with every line. Then he smiled. It was the most dangerous thing Clara had ever seen. Well, he said quietly, this is going to be interesting. He held out the letter. Clara read it, and her blood turned to ice. The Empress demanded Clara's immediate arrest pending investigation for conspiracy against the crown. The evidence was being compiled. The trial would begin within 3 days. And at the bottom, in elegant script, this matter is not negotiable. Clara looked up at Lucien. What do we do? His eyes were pale gray fire. We go to war. War turned out to be paperwork and waiting. Clara sat in Lucien's study at 3 a.m, surrounded by legal documents and precedent cases that dated back 200 years. Her eyes burned from reading by candlelight. Her head pounded from trying to absorb information about imperial law that she should have spent years learning. Lucien stood by the window, still wearing his formal clothes from the reception. He hadn't slept, neither had she. Captain Thorn came and went every 20 minutes with updates, his face growing grimmer each time. The Empress had moved fast. Within 2 hours of sending her demand, she'd secured statements from 3 servants claiming they'd seen Clara meeting with known dissidents. She'd produced letters allegedly written in Clara's hand discussing plans to undermine the Emperor. She'd even found a merchant who swore Clara had purchased the poison found in her rooms. All of it fabricated, all of it completely believable. Lucien turned from the window. His face was carved from stone. They're building a case designed to make marital protection irrelevant. If they can prove you're a direct threat to the Empire, my authority to shield you becomes treason by association. Clara's hands tightened on the document she'd been reading. So what do we do? We prove the evidence is false. We trace who planted the poison and force them to testify. We find the servants who lied and break their stories apart. He moved to the desk, spreading out papers with surgical precision. And we do it in less than 3 days before the trial begins. That's impossible. Yes. His eyes met hers, which is exactly why they chose this method. They're counting on us not having enough time to mount a real defense. Clara stood pacing to the window. Below, the palace garden stretched out in geometric perfection, beautiful and empty in the moonlight. Somewhere in this building, someone had orchestrated an entire conspiracy to destroy her. Someone with enough power to manipulate the Empress herself. "Who hates me this much?" she asked quietly. Elise is angry, but this is beyond social games. Lucian was silent for a long moment. That's what bothers me. This level of coordination, this many resources mobilized this quickly. It's not about you specifically. You're just the weapon being used against me. Clara turned. What do you mean? Think about it. The Empress has been trying to reduce my influence for years. Every time the Emperor grants me more authority, she pushes back. But she can't attack me directly because I'm too useful to him. So instead she attacks my weakest point. He gestured toward Clara. A wife with no political protection, no family connections, no way to defend herself. If she can prove you're a traitor, I'm forced to either abandon you and look weak, or defend you and risk being implicated in treason. Clara's chest felt tight. So I'm bait in a trap meant for you. You were always bait. That was the point of marrying you. But I underestimated how fast they'd move. Lucian's jaw tightened. I thought we'd have months to establish your position before they tried something this aggressive. Instead, we got 3 days. The door opened. Thorn entered, his expression carefully neutral in a way that meant bad news was coming. The merchant who claimed to sell Lady Clara the poison has retracted his statement. He was found dead an hour ago. Apparent suicide. Clara's blood turned to ice. They killed him. To cover their tracks, Lucian said flatly. Dead men can't be questioned. What about the servants? 2 have disappeared. The 3rd is under guard in the Empress's personal quarters. We can't access her without a direct order from the Emperor. And the Emperor is conveniently unavailable. His advisors claim he's reviewing evidence and will make a decision before the trial, which means he's letting this play out to see if I survive it. Lucian's voice was empty of emotion. Smart of him. If I fall, he loses a useful tool but gains an excuse to consolidate more power. If I win, he keeps me and eliminates whoever was stupid enough to attack me. Thorn shifted uncomfortably. There's something else. A message came through unofficial channels. From Lord Corinth. Clara's head snapped up. One of the men from her father's case, one of the men she'd decided to destroy. What does he want? Lucian asked. He's offering information about the conspiracy against Lady Clara, in exchange for immunity regarding certain past business dealings. The room went silent. Clara's mind raced. Corinth was one of the men who'd helped frame her father, and now he was offering to help her in exchange for protection from the consequences she'd been planning to rain down on him. It's a trap, she said. It has to be. Probably, Lucian agreed. But we're running out of options. If Corinth actually knows something about who's behind this, we need it. He helped destroy my family, Clara said, and her voice came out harder than she'd intended. He falsified evidence that sent my father to prison. And now he wants immunity? Lucian met her eyes. Yes. The question is whether you want revenge or survival, because right now you can't have both. The words hit like a fist. Clara thought about the dossiers she'd read, the evidence she'd been ready to use. The 3 men who'd stolen everything from her family and built their fortunes on lies. She'd wanted to watch them burn, needed it with an intensity that scared her. But Lucien was right. She was 3 days from a treason trial that could end with her execution. Revenge was a luxury she couldn't afford. Set up the meeting, she said quietly. But I want guarantees. Legal protection in writing before he says a single word. Lucian nodded to Thorn, who left to make the arrangements. After the door closed, Lucian moved to where Clara stood. His hand found hers, warm and solid in the cold room. This is what power looks like, he said quietly. Making deals with people you despise because the alternative is destruction. Swallowing pride because survival matters more than satisfaction. He paused. If you're not ready for that, tell me now. We'll find another way. Clara thought about her father's stubborn insistence on doing things the right way, on following the law, trusting the system, believing that justice would prevail. He'd died with that belief intact. She wasn't going to. I'm ready, she said. Lord Corinth arrived at dawn, slipping into the palace through a servant's entrance like a rat entering a granary. He was older than his photographs suggested, soft around the middle, with nervous hands that wouldn't stay still. The kind of man who'd built his life on careful calculation and was now watching all his careful plans unravel. They met in a secure room 3 floors below the main palace. No windows, no servants, just Lucien, Clara, Corinth, and 2 of Lucien's personal guards standing silent by the door. Corinth wouldn't meet Clara's eyes. "The immunity agreement," he said, holding out a shaking hand. Lucien produced a document. Corinth read it twice, signed it, then passed it to his own lawyer to verify. Only after the man nodded did Corinth finally look at Clara. "I'm sorry," he said. His voice was barely a whisper. "For what happened to your father?" "I was weak. I let Hailsham and Vane convince me it was necessary. I've regretted it every day since." Clara's hands clenched into fists beneath the table. "Every day except the ones where you spent the money you stole from us." Corinth flinched but didn't argue. Lucien leaned forward. "Enough. Tell us what you know about the conspiracy against my wife." Corinth swallowed hard. "It started 6 months ago, before you were even married. The Empress's faction knew you'd eventually take a wife, and they wanted to make sure whoever you chose could be controlled or eliminated." He pulled papers from his jacket with trembling hands. They compiled lists of potential candidates, background checks, leverage points. "When you chose Clara, they activated a contingency plan." "What plan?" Lucien's voice could have cut stone. "Complete destruction, social isolation, fabricated evidence, legal persecution, whatever it took to force you to divorce her or face treason charges yourself. The poison was just the opening move." Corinth spread the papers across the table. "They have witnesses prepared to testify that Clara met with foreign agents, documents proving she received payments from enemy nations, even a supposed confession from a servant who claims Clara tried to hire him to poison the Emperor's wine. Clara's vision tunneled. All of that. They'd manufactured an entire conspiracy." "Who's coordinating it?" Lucien asked. Corinth hesitated. His hands shook harder. "The immunity agreement covers everything," Lucien said coldly, "but only if you tell us the truth. Lie or withhold information, and the deal is void." Corinth closed his eyes. "It's Lady Vivienne. She's been working with the Empress for months. They convinced several noble houses to contribute resources in exchange for promises of increased power once you're removed from your position." Clara felt the room tilt. "Lady Vivienne, the woman in ruby red from the Duchess's breakfast, the one who'd smiled while delivering casual cruelties. But there's more," Corinth continued, and his voice dropped even lower. "Vivienne couldn't have done this alone. She needed someone inside your household, someone with access to Clara's rooms, her schedule, her movements." Lucien's expression went absolutely blank, the kind of blank that preceded violence. "Who?" Corinth pulled out one more paper, a letter. He slid it across the table. Clara picked it up, read the first line, felt her heart stop. It was from Anne, her maid. The girl who'd warned her about the dress color, who'd shown her kindness, who'd seemed like the only genuine person in this entire palace. The letter detailed Clara's daily routine, her conversations with Lucien, her reactions to court politics. Everything Anne had observed and reported back to Vivienne with meticulous detail. "I'm sorry," Corinth said again. "She was placed in your service specifically to spy on you. Vivienne's been reading reports about your every move since your wedding night." Clara set down the letter. Her hands were steady now. The shock had burned through into something colder. "Where is Anne now?" Lucien asked. "Safe house in the merchant quarter. Vivienne moved her there yesterday after the poison was planted. Probably planning to use her as a witness if needed, then dispose of her once the trial is over." Clara stood. Her chair scraped against stone. "I want to see her." Lucien looked at her. "That's not—" "I want to see her," Clara repeated. "The girl who smiled at me every morning while reporting my words to people trying to destroy me. I want to look her in the eyes." Something shifted in Lucien's expression. He nodded slowly. "Captain Thorne, have the safe house surrounded. We're paying it a visit." The safe house was a narrow building squeezed between a bakery and a textile shop, unremarkable and easy to miss. Perfect for hiding people you wanted to disappear. Lucien's guards went in first, silent and efficient. By the time Clara and Lucien entered, 3 of Vivienne's men were already restrained and Anne was sitting at a table in the kitchen, her face white with terror. She looked up when Clara walked in. Something crumbled in her expression. "My lady, I can explain." "Don't." Clara's voice came out flat. "I don't want explanations. I want the truth." Anne's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't have a choice. My family owes money to Lady Vivian's house. She said if I didn't help her, they'd sell my younger sisters to pay the debt. I had to—" "You had choices," Clara interrupted. "You could have told me, asked for help, warned me what was happening. Instead, you smiled and brought me tea and reported every word I said to people planning my execution." The tears spilled over. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I never wanted—" "Sorry doesn't matter." Clara pulled out a chair and sat across from her. "What matters is what you do now. You can keep protecting Vivian and go down with her when she falls. Or you can tell us everything you know, and maybe I'll convince my husband not to have you arrested for treason." Anne's breath hitched. She looked at Lucian, who stood silent and terrifying in the doorway. "Everything," Claire repeated. "Every conversation, every plan, every person involved. And if I find out you lied about even one detail, there won't be enough of your family left to bury." The word should have horrified her. A month ago they would have. But Clara had learned something these past few days. Mercy was for people who could afford it. People who weren't fighting for their lives against enemies who'd already decided they were disposable. Anne talked. For 2 hours she spilled everything. The network of servants reporting to various noble houses. The coded messages hidden in delivery schedules. The meetings Vivian held in secret where she coordinated with the Empress's representatives. And most importantly, the next phase of the plan. Because destroying Clara was just the beginning. Once she was convicted, they'd use the scandal to pressure the Emperor into stripping Lucian of his authority, redistribute his territories among the noble houses that had helped bring him down, turn the most powerful man in the empire into a cautionary tale about what happened when you refused to play politics the traditional way. By the time Anne finished, dawn light was creeping through the windows. She sat hunched over the table, crying quietly, while Clara absorbed everything she'd learned. Finally, Lucien spoke. "Is that everything?" Anne nodded miserably. "I swear, that's everything I know." Lucien looked at Clara. "Your decision." Clara studied the girl who'd betrayed her. Anne was maybe 17, terrified, trapped by circumstances she probably hadn't understood until it was too late. In another world, Clara might have felt sorry for her. But this wasn't another world. This was the imperial palace. And feeling sorry for people who tried to destroy you was how you ended up dead. "Put her in protective custody," Clara said. "If her testimony at the trial matches what she told us today, her family's debt is forgiven. If it doesn't, turn her over to the Empress's faction and let them clean up their own mess." Anne's head jerked up. "Thank you. Thank you so much. I'll—" "Save it," Clara said. "You were ready to watch me die to protect yourself. Don't expect me to trust your gratitude." She stood and walked out. Lucien followed, leaving Thorne to secure Anne in the safe house. Outside, the city was waking up. Merchants opening shops, workers heading to the docks. Normal people living normal lives while Clara's world burned down around her. Lucien stopped beside her. "You're learning fast," Clara laughed. It came out bitter. "Learning what? How to threaten teenage girls? How to make deals with men who destroyed my family? How to survive in a place where everyone wants me dead? Learning how power works." Lucien's voice was quiet. "It's not about being cruel. It's about making choices that keep you alive even when they cost pieces of your soul." Clara looked at him. "Is that what it cost you? Your soul?" Lucien's expression was unreadable. "I stopped keeping track a long time ago." They stood there in the early morning light. Two people who'd been forced to become things they'd never wanted to be just to survive a world designed to destroy them. Then Lucien's hand found hers. "Come on. We have a trial to prepare for. And now that we know who's behind this, we can start fighting back." Chit. The next 48 hours were a blur of preparation and strategy. Lucien mobilized every resource he had. Lawyers who specialized in imperial law, investigators who traced the fabricated evidence back to its sources, political allies who owed him favors and were willing to testify. Clara worked beside him, learning to read legal documents and identify weaknesses in testimony. She met with witnesses, coached them on what to say, learned how to present herself as sympathetic rather than threatening. She was becoming someone new, someone harder, someone who could look a room full of people in the eyes and calculate exactly how to manipulate them. The realization should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like relief, like finally having weapons that matched the fight she was in. On the second night, Lucien received a message. He read it, and something terrible crossed his face. "What?" Clara asked. "The Emperor wants to see me. Alone. Tonight. That's good, isn't it? You can explain." "No." Lucien set down the message. "When the Emperor summons you alone at night, it's never good. It means he's about to ask you to do something he doesn't want witnesses to remember." Clara's stomach clenched. What could he want? "I don't know. But whatever it is, refusing isn't an option." He left an hour later. Clara waited in his study, surrounded by papers and evidence, and the terrible silence of not knowing what was happening. The candles burned down. Midnight came and went. Finally, around 2 a.m, Lucien returned. He looked exhausted, older than she'd ever seen him. Clara stood. "What did he say?" Lucien poured himself a drink, drained it, poured another. "He offered me a deal. Drop the marital protection. Let you stand trial without my intervention. In exchange, he'll make sure the verdict is exile instead of execution. You'll be sent away, but you'll live." Clara's breath stopped. "And if you refuse, then he'll allow the Empress's faction to pursue treason charges against both of us. We'll stand trial together, and if we're convicted, we'll die together." The room spun. Clara grabbed the desk to steady herself. Why would he do that? Because he's tired of the political instability, tired of the Empress's faction and my power base fighting for control. This is his way of forcing a resolution. Either I sacrifice you to maintain my position, or I risk everything to protect you and potentially remove both problems at once. Clara sank into a chair. Her mind raced through options, consequences, possibilities. None of them ended well. "What did you tell him?" she asked quietly. Lucien set down his glass. He moved to where she sat and knelt in front of her so they were eye to eye. "I told him to go to hell." Clara stared at him. "You what?" "I told him I wasn't abandoning you, that if he wanted to put you on trial, he'd have to put me there too. And if he was willing to execute his most effective advisor over a manufactured conspiracy, then maybe he deserved the political chaos that would follow." "You can't do that." Clara's voice shook. "You'll lose everything. Your position, your authority, your life. I don't care." Lucien's hands framed her face, forcing her to focus on him. "Listen to me, Clara. I've spent my entire adult life making cold calculations, sacrificing people and principles for strategic advantage, becoming exactly what everyone thought I was because it was effective. But you?" He paused. "You walked into this palace with nothing and survived 3 days of attacks that would have destroyed anyone else. You stood up to people who terrified you. You made impossible choices and kept your spine straight through all of it. And somewhere along the way, protecting you stopped being strategy and started being the only thing that matters." Tears burned in Clara's eyes. She blinked them back furiously. "You're going to get yourself killed." "Probably." His smile was sad and fierce all at once. "But I'd rather die protecting someone who deserves it than live by abandoning them. I've made too many of those choices already. I won't make another." Clara's control finally broke. She pressed her forehead against his, her hands gripping his shoulders, and let herself shake with the terror and rage and desperate hope she'd been holding back for days. "What do we do now?" she whispered. Lucien's arms wrapped around her. "Now we go to trial. We present our evidence. We force them to look at the truth even if they don't want to see it. And if it's not enough..." He pulled back to meet her eyes. "Then we show them what happens when you back desperate people into corners and expect them to go quietly." The trial began at noon on the third day. The imperial courtroom was enormous, designed to intimidate. Marble columns stretched toward vaulted ceilings. Hundreds of nobles packed the gallery, dressed in their finest clothes to watch the spectacle. The Empress sat in a place of honor beside the Emperor's empty throne, her expression serene and merciless. Clara and Lucien entered together. The room went silent. Every eye tracked them as they moved to the defense table. Clara wore a simple dress in deep blue. No jewelry except Lucien's mother's necklace. Her hair pulled back severely. She looked young, invulnerable, and absolutely terrified, which was exactly the image Lucian's lawyers had coached her to project. The judges filed in, 7 of them, chosen from the highest courts in the empire. Theoretically, impartial, actually bought and sold by various political factions. The chief judge was an old man with iron gray hair and eyes that revealed nothing. He surveyed the room, then spoke. "We are here to examine accusations of treason and conspiracy against Lady Clara Arden, wife of Grand Duke Lucien Arden. The prosecution may present their case." Lady Vivian's lawyer stood. He was smooth and confident, laying out the evidence with surgical precision. The poison, the fabricated letters, the witness testimony. Everything designed to paint Clara as a foreign agent working to undermine the empire. It was compelling, devastating. By the time he finished, even Clara could see how guilty she looked. Then it was their turn. Lucien's lead lawyer stood. She was a woman named Thea Moorgrave, 60 years old and sharper than broken glass. She'd spent 40 years in imperial courts and knew every loophole, every precedent, every dirty trick. She started by systematically destroying the prosecution's evidence. The poison was purchased by a merchant now conveniently dead. The letters were written in handwriting that didn't match Clara's verified samples. The servants who'd testified were all connected to Lady Vivian's household and had received payment shortly before making their statements. Then she called Anne to the stand. Anne looked terrified. She was dressed plainly, her hands shaking as she swore her oath. But when Moorgrave asked her questions, her voice was steady. She described everything: the network of spies, Vivian's coordination with the Empress's faction, the deliberate plan to frame Clara as part of a larger scheme to destroy Lucien's power base. The courtroom erupted. The judges called for order. The Empress's face went white with fury. Moorgrave pressed the advantage. She called witness after witness. Investigators who'd traced the fabricated evidence back to its sources. Political analysts who explained exactly how destroying Clara would benefit specific noble houses. Even Lord Corinth, who testified about his own involvement in both Clara's father's ruin and the current conspiracy. By the time Moorgrave finished, the entire conspiracy lay exposed. The judges conferred quietly. Then the chief judge spoke. "This court finds the evidence against Lady Clara Arden to be fabricated and politically motivated. The charges of treason are dismissed." Clara's knees almost gave out. Lucian's hand found hers, steadying her. But the chief judge wasn't finished. However, these proceedings have revealed a conspiracy to manipulate imperial justice for political gain. We recommend a full investigation into all parties involved, including members of the imperial household. The Empress stood. Her face was fury wrapped in control. "This is outrageous. I demand—" The doors at the back of the courtroom opened. The Emperor walked in. Everyone dropped to their knees, everyone except Clara and Lucien, who the Emperor had specifically exempted from that requirement years ago. The Emperor was a tall man in his 50s with dark hair going gray and eyes that missed nothing. He surveyed the courtroom with the expression of someone examining particularly disappointing subordinates. "Rise," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Everyone stood. The Empress looked like she wanted to say something, but thought better of it. The Emperor moved to stand before the judge's bench. "I've been listening to these proceedings from my private chambers. Quite illuminating." He turned to face the court. "It appears several members of my household have been using imperial institutions for personal vendettas. This is unacceptable." "Your Majesty," the Empress began, "if you would allow me to explain—" "No!" The Emperor's voice cut through her words like a blade. "You will explain nothing. You will return to your quarters and await my decision on what consequences your involvement in this conspiracy warrants." The Empress's face went white. She opened her mouth, closed it, then curtsied and fled. The Emperor looked at Vivian next. "Lady Vivian, you are stripped of all titles and lands pending a full investigation into your activities. Guards will escort you to confinement." Vivian's composure finally cracked. "Your Majesty, please. You were only attempting to manipulate my justice system to destroy one of my most valuable advisors." The Emperor's expression could have frozen fire. "Take her away!" Guards moved forward. Vivian struggled briefly, then went still as they restrained her. The Emperor turned to Lucian. "Grand Duke Arden, you have served this empire faithfully for years. I apologize that your wife was subjected to this unpleasantness. Lucien's expression revealed nothing. I appreciate your Majesty's intervention. The Emperor's eyes shifted to Clara. And you, Lady Clara, you've shown remarkable resilience under pressure. I hope you'll consider this trial an unfortunate introduction to court politics rather than a representative example. It was as close to an apology as she was likely to get. Clara curtsied. Thank you, Your Majesty. The Emperor nodded, then he looked back at the judges. This trial is concluded. All charges dismissed. The accused are free to go. He turned and walked out. The room remained silent until he was gone. Then chaos erupted. Nobles talking over each other, reporters scribbling frantically, lawyers arguing about precedent and procedure. Clara just stood there, holding Lucien's hand, trying to process that it was over. She'd survived. They'd won. But when she looked at Lucien's face, she saw something that made her stomach clench. He didn't look relieved. He looked calculating. They returned to Lucien's study in silence. Once the door was closed, Clara finally spoke. What's wrong? We won. The charges are dismissed. The conspiracy is exposed. Yes? Lucien moved to his desk and pulled out a sealed envelope. Which is why the Emperor gave me this on my way out of the courtroom. Clara took it, broke the seal, read the contents. Her blood turned to ice. It was an official appointment. Lucien was being sent to command the Northern Territories. Immediately. For an indefinite period. It was a promotion. On paper. In reality, it was exile. Clara looked up. He's removing you from court under the guise of giving me more responsibility, yes. Lucien's voice was flat. The Empress's faction is too damaged to oppose him directly now. But I've become too politically expensive to keep close. So he's sending me away where I can't continue destabilizing his court. And me? You can come with me, or you can stay here and maintain a presence at court in my absence. He paused. It's your choice. Clara stared at the letter. After everything they'd been through, after exposing a conspiracy and surviving a trial, they were still being punished, still being controlled. The Emperor had never intended to let them win. He'd just changed the rules so that victory still meant defeat. When do we leave? She asked quietly. 5 days. Lucien's expression was unreadable. If we leave, you could stay here. Build your own power base. Use what you've learned to become a force in court politics without me. Clara looked at him, at this man who'd risked everything to protect her, who'd taught her how to survive in a world designed to destroy her, who'd chosen her over his own safety even when every strategic calculation said to abandon her. The smart choice was probably to stay, build connections, establish herself as someone separate from Lucien's shadow. But Clara had learned something these past few days. Smart choices weren't always the right ones. And sometimes survival meant choosing the people who'd proven they'd fight for you over the strategic advantages that could disappear overnight. Where you go, I go, she said. We started this together. We'll finish it together. Something shifted in Lucien's expression. Not quite relief, not quite surprise. Something deeper. He crossed to where she stood and pulled her close. For a long moment they just held each other. Two people who'd been forged into weapons by necessity and somehow found something like trust in the process. Then Lucien spoke quietly into her hair. The North is going to be harder than court politics. Colder. More brutal. The noble houses there answer to no one and they don't respect authority they haven't tested. Good, Clara said. I'm tired of people who hide their knives behind smiles. At least in the North, we'll see them coming. Lucien pulled back to look at her. You've changed. So have you, Clara said. You used to tell me I was expendable. Now you're asking me to come with you into exile. His hand came up to frame her face. You stopped being expendable the moment you refused to break under pressure. Now you're... He paused, searching for words. Now you're the only person in this entire empire I actually trust. The confession hung between them, raw and unexpected and absolutely terrifying in its honesty. Clara's throat felt tight. I don't know how to be what you need. Neither do I. Lucien's smile was sad and fierce. But we'll figure it out together. He kissed her then. Not the formal touch from their wedding. Something real and desperate and full of everything they'd been too afraid to say out loud. When they finally broke apart, Clara rested her forehead against his chest and tried to steady her breathing. 5 days, she said. Then we leave everything behind and start over. Yes. Clara thought about her family, about Anne's betrayal, about Vivian's conspiracy and the Empress's cold fury and the Emperor's calculated manipulation. She thought about the dossiers still hidden in her dresser, the evidence against the men who'd destroyed her father, the revenge she'd wanted so desperately and had been forced to trade for survival. "There's one thing I need to do before we leave," she said quietly. Lucian pulled back to look at her. "What?" Clara met his eyes. "I need to visit Lord Hailsham, the man who killed my father. I need to look him in the eyes and make sure he knows that I know what he did." "That's dangerous. He could use it against you." "I don't care." Claire's voice was steel. "I gave up my revenge to survive the trial, but I won't leave this city without making sure he understands that someday, somehow, I will make him pay for what he took from my family." Lucien studied her face for a long moment. Then he nodded. "I'll arrange it, but I'm coming with you." Lord Hailsham's estate was obscene in its luxury. Marble everywhere, gold fixtures, art worth more than most people earned in a lifetime. All of it built on money stolen from Clara's family. They were shown to a sitting room where Hailsham waited. He was exactly as his photograph suggested, soft, comfortable, smug. He stood when they entered, his expression carefully pleasant. Grand Duke Arden. "Lady Clara. What an unexpected honor. Please sit." "We'll stand," Lucian said coldly. Hailsham's smile faltered slightly. "Then how may I help you?" Clara stepped forward. Her hands were steady. Her voice was ice. "You can start by explaining why you stole my father's fortune, falsified evidence against him, and let him die in prison while you built a life on his money." The room went silent. Hailsham's face drained of color. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do." Clara pulled papers from her bag. The evidence Lucian had compiled. She spread them across Hailsham's expensive table. Every transaction, every bribe, every lie. "It's all here." Hailsham stared at the papers. His hands shook. "This is... Where did you get these? Does it matter?" Clara leaned forward. "You destroyed my family, killed my father, left my mother and sisters to starve, all so you could live like this." She gestured at the obscene wealth surrounding them. Hailsham's face twisted. "Your father was weak. He trusted the wrong people. That's not my fault. You were one of those people." Clara's voice could have cut stone. "He trusted you, called you friend, and you betrayed him for money." "It was business," Hailsham said desperately. "Nothing personal. Just the way things work." Clara smiled. It was the most terrifying expression she'd ever worn. "Then you'll understand that what I'm about to do is also just business. Nothing personal." She nodded to Lucien. He stepped forward and handed Hailsham a letter. "That's a copy of all the evidence against you," Lucien said calmly. "We're sending the original to the Emperor's investigators. You'll be arrested within the week." Hailsham's hands shook so badly he dropped the letter. But the immunity agreement." Corinth had immunity," Clara interrupted. "You don't. You never did. I made sure of that." Hailsham stared at her. "You can't do this. I have connections. Political protection." "You had protection," Lucien corrected. "But after the trial exposed how corrupt the court has become, the Emperor is looking for examples to make. Congratulations. You're one of them." Hailsham's legs gave out. He collapsed into a chair, his face white with terror. Clara looked down at him and felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not revenge, just cold, hard certainty. "This is for my father," she said quietly, "and for every person you hurt because you thought being powerful meant you could get away with anything." She turned and walked toward the door. Lucien followed. Behind them, Hailsham started crying, begging, promising things he couldn't deliver. Clara didn't look back. Outside, the sun was setting over the capital. In 5 days, they'd leave this place behind. But tonight, Clara had done the one thing she'd promised herself she would do. She'd looked her father's killer in the eyes and made sure he knew that justice was coming for him. Not the clean, legal kind he'd helped corrupt. The slow, brutal kind that destroyed everything you'd built and left you with nothing. Lucian's hand found hers. "How do you feel?" Clara thought about it. "Empty," she said finally. I thought it would feel better, make the anger go away. It never does, Lucian said quietly. Revenge just creates new holes where the old anger used to be. They walked to the carriage in silence. As they rode back to the palace, Clara leaned against Lucian's shoulder and watched the city pass by. Somewhere in the north, a new life was waiting, harder, colder, more brutal than anything she'd faced so far. But she wouldn't be facing it alone. And she wouldn't be facing it as the broken girl who'd arrived at this palace afraid of her own shadow. She'd become something else, something harder and sharper and infinitely more dangerous. The merchant's daughter was gone. The woman who'd survived a conspiracy and a trial and a palace full of enemies had taken her place. And whoever tried to destroy her in the north was going to learn the same lesson Hailsham had just learned. That underestimating Clara Arden was the last mistake they'd ever make. The northern territories greeted them with snow and silence. Clara stood at the carriage window, watching endless white plains stretch toward mountains that clawed at gray sky. 5 days of travel from the capital had brought them to a land that felt like the edge of the world, cold enough to burn your lungs, empty enough to swallow screams. Lucien sat across from her, reading reports that had arrived by courier that morning. His expression gave nothing away, but Clara had learned to read the tension in his shoulders. Something was wrong. "What is it?" she asked. He didn't look up. "The northern houses refused my summons. All of them. They claim the weather makes travel impossible." "In summer?" Lucian's jaw tightened. "Yes." Clara felt ice that had nothing to do with temperature settle in her chest. "They're challenging you, testing me. There's a difference." He finally met her eyes. "They want to see if being sent north was punishment or opportunity. If I'm weak enough to be ignored or strong enough to make them regret it. And if they decide you're weak, then they'll try to take everything I have before the Emperor realizes his mistake and recalls me." Lucian folded the reports with precise movements. The northern territories operate on different rules than the capital. Power here is about control and fear, not politics and alliances. If I can't establish dominance immediately, we won't survive the winter. The carriage rounded a curve, and their destination came into view. Blackstone Keep, the fortress that would be their home and headquarters. It rose from the snow like a fist of dark stone, all sharp angles and defensive walls. Built for war, not comfort. Clara studied it and felt something shift in her chest. The capital had been a battlefield of whispers and poison. This place was honest in its brutality. She could work with that. The keep's courtyard was chaos when they arrived. Soldiers drilling in formation, servants hauling supplies, officers shouting orders that echoed off stone walls. Everyone stopped when Lucian's carriage entered, their faces ranging from curiosity to barely concealed hostility. Captain Thorne was waiting at the main entrance. He'd arrived 3 days earlier to begin preparations. His expression was grim. "Your Grace, my lady, welcome to Blackstone." He lowered his voice as they climbed the steps. "We have a situation. The Northern Lord sent a message this morning. They're holding a gathering at House Ravencrest tomorrow night. You weren't invited." Lucien's expression didn't change. "Then we'll invite ourselves." Thorne's eyebrows rose. "That's a direct provocation. They'll see it as disrespect." "Good. Let them." Lucien moved past him into the keep. "I'm tired of being tested. Time to show them exactly who they're dealing with." Inside, Blackstone was as brutal as its exterior. Stone floors, narrow windows, fireplaces that burned constantly and still barely kept out the cold. Clara's breath misted in the air as servants led her to chambers that would make her palace rooms seem like paradise by comparison. But there was something liberating about the harshness. No pretense here, no polite cruelty hidden behind etiquette. Just survival and strength and the understanding that weakness got you killed. Clara changed into warmer clothes and went looking for Lucian. She found him in what passed for a study, surrounded by maps of the northern territories. Thorne stood beside him, pointing out various holdings. House Ravencrest controls the eastern passes. House Ironwood has the western trade routes. House Stormbreak holds the coastal fortifications. They've been operating independently for years, paying lip service to imperial authority, but essentially governing themselves. And now they think the Emperor sending me here means I'm being punished, that I've lost influence. Lucian traced a line across the map. So they're preparing to carve up my authority before I can establish it. Clara moved closer. What would happen if you didn't go to their gathering tomorrow? They'd interpret it as fear. Within a week, they'd start raiding my supply lines, bribing my soldiers, testing how far they can push before I push back. Lucien's finger stopped on a point near the center of the territories. And once they realize I won't fight, they'll crush me completely. Then we go, Clara said. We walk into their gathering uninvited, and we make them understand that you're not here because you're weak. You're here because the Emperor trusts you to bring order to a region that's been lawless for too long. Lucien looked at her. His expression was complicated. That's a dangerous game. If we fail, if they sense weakness, they'll turn on us like wolves. Then we don't show weakness, Clara said simply. Something that might have been pride flickered in Lucien's eyes. He turned back to the map. Thorn. Send word to House Ravencrest. Inform them that the Grand Duke and his wife will be attending their gathering tomorrow night. Make it clear this isn't a request. Thorn grinned. It was not a pleasant expression. With pleasure, Your Grace. What? The ride to House Ravencrest took 4 hours through snow that fell thick enough to blind. Clara sat beside Lucien in a reinforced carriage, wearing layers of fur that still didn't quite keep out the cold. Behind them rode 50 of Lucien's personal guard, armed and armored, ready for whatever reception awaited. Clara's hands were steady on her lap, but her mind raced. She'd survived the capital's poison. Now she had to survive the North's brutality. Different weapons, same war. Lucien hadn't spoken since they left Blackstone. He sat with that absolute stillness he adopted before violence. Clara had learned to recognize it. The calm before, he became something terrifying. Are you afraid? She asked quietly. His eyes opened. Always. Fear keeps you sharp. It's confidence that gets you killed. The carriage slowed. Through the window, Clara could see Ravencrest Hall rising from the snow. Larger than Blackstone. Older. Built by people who'd held power in the North for 300 years and weren't about to surrender it to some southern duke the Emperor had exiled. The courtyard was packed with carriages bearing the sigils of every major northern house. Hundreds of nobles had gathered for what was clearly meant to be a show of unity against Lucien, a message written in bodies and banners. We don't want you here. The carriage stopped. Servants rushed forward to open the door, their faces carefully neutral. Lucien stepped out first. Clara followed, and the cold hit like a fist. Her breath frosted instantly. Snow crunched under her feet. Every eye in the courtyard turned to them. The conversations died. For a moment, absolute silence. Then a man emerged from the crowd. Tall, broad-shouldered, with iron-gray hair and a face carved from granite. He wore furs worth a fortune and carried himself like someone who'd never encountered authority he felt compelled to obey. Lord Marcus Ravencrest, Clara realized, the most powerful man in the North. Grand Duke Arden. His voice carried across the courtyard. What an unexpected surprise. I don't recall extending an invitation. You didn't, Lucien said calmly. I came anyway. Ravencrest's eyes narrowed. This is a private gathering, for northern families only. Then it's fortunate I'm the Emperor's appointed governor of the Northern Territories. That makes everything here my business. Lucien's voice was pleasant, empty, absolutely terrifying in its lack of inflection. Shall we continue this conversation inside, or would you prefer to establish your insubordination publicly? The word insubordination hung in the air like a blade. Ravencrest's face flushed. Around them, nobles shifted uncomfortably. Ravencrest's hand moved toward his belt, toward a weapon Clara couldn't see but knew was there. Lucien didn't move, didn't even blink, but every one of his 50 guards shifted stance simultaneously, hands going to sword hilts. The sound of metal against leather whispered through the courtyard. The message was clear. Draw that weapon and everyone dies. Ravencrest's hand stopped. His eyes flicked to the guards, to Lucien, to Clara standing calm and cold beside her husband. Then he smiled. It was the smile of a predator who decided to wait for better hunting conditions. Of course, Grand Duke, you're welcome to join us. He gestured toward the hall. Though I should warn you, northern hospitality isn't as refined as you're used to in the capital. I'll manage, Lucien said. They moved inside. The hall was massive, heated by fireplaces the size of small rooms, tables laden with food and drink. Hundreds of northern nobles watching Lucien and Clara with expressions ranging from hostility to calculation to barely concealed bloodlust. Clara kept her spine straight and her face calm. She'd walked into the imperial palace knowing she was hated. This was just a colder, more honest version of the same thing. Ravencrest led them to a raised platform where the most powerful lords were gathered. House Ironwood, House Stormbreak, House Blackridge, all of them old families with old grudges and older violence. "Let me introduce you," Ravencrest said, his voice carrying through the hall. "Lords and ladies of the North, I present Grand Duke Lucien Arden, recently appointed governor of our territories, and his wife, Lady Clara Arden." He paused. "Formerly Clara Vale, the merchant's daughter." The emphasis on merchant was deliberate, a reminder that Clara was common blood in a room full of aristocrats who measured worth by lineage. Clara felt every eye turned to her, judging, dismissing, deciding she was irrelevant. She'd felt this before. In the capital, at the Duchess's breakfast, at Elisa's gathering, but she wasn't the same woman who'd sat terrified at those tables anymore. Clara stepped forward, separating herself slightly from Lucien. Her voice was clear and cold as the air outside. "Formerly Clara Vale. Yes, the daughter of a merchant your families did business with until it became more profitable to destroy him." She met Ravencrest's eyes. "I'm told northern lords value strength and honesty above politeness. So let me be honest. I know exactly what you think of me. Common blood. Southern softness. A liability my husband should have left behind." She paused. "You're welcome to believe that, right up until the moment you realize how completely you've miscalculated." Silence. Absolute, shocked silence. Then Lord Ironwood laughed. He was younger than Ravencrest, maybe 40, with scars across his face that spoke of violence survived. "Bold words, girl. Let's see if you can back them up." "She already has," Lucien said quietly. He moved to stand beside Clara, his presence solid and dangerous. "My wife survived a conspiracy orchestrated by the Empress's faction. She exposed corruption at the highest levels of the imperial court. She faced down a treason trial and walked away free." He looked around the hall. "So when you dismiss her as irrelevant, remember, she survived things that would have destroyed most of you." Lord Stormbreak rose from his seat. He was ancient, maybe 80, but his eyes were sharp as broken glass. "Pretty speech, Grand Duke. But words are cheap in the North. We judge people by what they do, not what they've survived." He gestured to the hall. "You want our respect? Our loyalty? Then prove you deserve it." "Name the test," Lucien said. Stormbreak's smile was vicious. "The Winter Summit begins in 3 days. Every northern house sends representatives to negotiate trade agreements, settle disputes, resolve conflicts. It's where we determine who holds power for the coming year." He leaned forward. "Attend. Navigate the negotiations. Prove you understand how the North actually works. And if you survive with your authority intact, we'll consider recognizing your appointment. And if I refuse, then we'll know you're as weak as we suspect, and we'll act accordingly." It was a trap. Clara could see it in the way the other lords watched. They'd use the summit to humiliate Lucien, undermine his authority, and prove he didn't belong here. But refusing would be worse. It would confirm their suspicions and give them license to act against him openly. Lucien's expression revealed nothing. "I'll attend. With my wife." Ravencrest's eyebrows rose. "The summit isn't a social gathering, Grand Duke. It's serious business. Perhaps Lady Clara would be more comfortable remaining at Blackstone." "No," Clara said. "Where my husband goes, I go. And if the North values strength and honesty, then you'll appreciate me being direct. I'm not staying behind so you can attack him without witnesses." Something that might have been respect flickered in Ironwood's expression. "She's got spine, Arden. I'll give you that." "She's got more than spine," Lucien said quietly, "and you're all about to find out exactly how much." Mount. They returned to Blackstone near midnight. The halls were quiet, most of the staff asleep. Lucien went straight to his study. Clara followed. Inside, he poured 2 glasses of whiskey and handed one to Clara. She drank. It burned all the way down. "That was reckless," Lucien said, confronting them like that. So was showing up uninvited. "True." He drank his own whiskey. "They're going to use the summit to destroy us, you understand that?" "Yes." "And you still want to go?" "I have to." "We have to. Because if we back down now, we lose everything." Clara set down her glass. You taught me that. In the capital. That survival means refusing to show weakness even when you're terrified. Lucian studied her face. I also taught you that some battles aren't worth fighting. That knowing when to retreat is as important as knowing when to attack. Is that what you want to do? Retreat? No. His voice was flat. I want to burn their halls to the ground and make them remember why the Emperor keeps me close and his enemies keep their distance. But that's my anger talking, not strategy. Clara moved closer. Then let your anger talk. You've spent years being strategic, calculating, making cold decisions because they were effective. She reached up, touching his face. Maybe it's time to show them what happens when you stop calculating and just act. Lucian's hand came up to cover hers. That's dangerous advice. Everything about this is dangerous. Clara's voice was steady. But we're already at war. We have been since the moment the Emperor sent us here. So we can fight carefully and lose slowly, or we can fight brutally and maybe win. Lucien pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. You've changed so much since the wedding. So have you, Clara said. You stopped seeing me as expendable. Yes. His voice was rough. Somewhere along the way, you became the only thing I'm not willing to sacrifice. The confession hung between them, raw and terrifying and absolutely true. Clara kissed him, hard and desperate and full of everything they'd been through. When they broke apart, her voice was steady. Then let's make sure they never forget what it costs to threaten the things you won't sacrifice. The Winter Summit was held in neutral territory, an ancient fortress built into the mountains, accessible only by narrow passes that could be blocked with avalanches if things went wrong. Hundreds of northern nobles descended on the location, bringing guards and advisors and enough weapons to start a war. Clara and Lucien arrived with their 50 guards and Captain Thorne. The fortress was already packed. Banners from every northern house hung from stone walls. The main hall buzzed with conversations that stopped when Lucien entered. Lord Ravencrest stood at the head table, already established as the dominant presence. He nodded to Lucien with cold courtesy. Grand Duke, Lady Clara, welcome to the summit. Please, join us. They took seats at a table near the center, deliberately positioned to be visible but not honored. A subtle insult. The negotiations began immediately. Trade routes, resource distribution, dispute resolution, all of it handled with brutal efficiency and barely concealed threats. Clara watched and learned. The northern lords didn't negotiate like the capital's nobles. No careful politeness, no subtle manipulation, just direct demands and immediate consequences for refusal. Lord Ironwood wanted control of a mining operation that House Blackridge claimed. Instead of legal arguments, he simply stated that his soldiers were already occupying the mines, and Blackridge could either accept compensation or try to take them back by force. Blackridge chose compensation. Smart. House Stormbreak demanded increased tariffs on southern merchants using northern ports. Lucien objected. Stormbreak suggested that if the Grand Duke didn't like northern customs, perhaps he should return south. The hall went silent. Every eye turned to Lucien. He stood slowly. His voice was quiet but carried through the entire fortress. I'm not going anywhere, and neither are imperial tariff laws. If you want to renegotiate terms, we can discuss it properly. But if you're threatening to ignore imperial authority, we should be clear about what that means. Stormbreak's eyes narrowed. And what does it mean, Grand Duke? It means treason. Lucien's expression was empty. It means I report your house to the Emperor for attempting to undermine imperial law. And it means imperial troops march north to enforce compliance. You wouldn't dare, Stormbreak said. The Emperor sent you here to get you out of the capital. He doesn't care what happens in the north. Doesn't he? Lucien pulled a document from his jacket. This is a directive from the Emperor himself, granting me full authority to enforce imperial law in the northern territories by any means necessary, including military force. He set it on the table. So threaten me again, Lord Stormbreak. Give me an excuse to make an example of you. The silence was suffocating. Stormbreak stared at the document, at Lucien, at the 50 guards standing ready behind him. Finally, he sat down. His face was stone. We'll table the tariff discussion for future negotiations. Wise choice, Lucian said. He sat. Clara could see the tension vibrating through him. That had been a calculated risk. Revealing his authority this early could backfire if the Northern Lords decided to unite against him. But it had also established that he wasn't here to be tested. He was here to rule. The negotiations continued through the afternoon. Clara watched as Lucian navigated each conflict with precision, giving ground where it didn't matter, holding firm where it did. Slowly, methodically, establishing that he understood Northern politics better than they'd assumed. Then, near evening, Lord Ravencrest stood. There's one more matter to address, a personal challenge. He looked directly at Clara. Lady Clara has made bold claims about her strength and resilience. I propose we test those claims. Clara's pulse spiked. Lucien's hand found hers under the table, a warning or support. She couldn't tell which. What kind of test? She asked. Her voice was steady. A hunt, Ravencrest said. Tomorrow morning. The Northern Lords and their spouses track winter wolves through the mountain passes. It's tradition, a way to prove courage and capability. He smiled. I'm sure a merchant's daughter from the south will have no trouble keeping up. The other lords murmured approval. This was another trap. Clara could see it. They wanted her to refuse, to show weakness, or worse, to accept and then fail publicly. Lucian started to speak. Clara squeezed his hand, stopping him. I accept, she said clearly. Tomorrow morning, I'll be ready. Ravencrest's smile widened. Excellent. I look forward to seeing how Southern nobility handles Northern tradition. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She stood at the window of their chambers, watching snow fall through moonlight. Behind her, Lucian was reviewing maps of the hunting grounds. You don't have to do this, he said without looking up. I can make excuses, say you're ill, and let them think I'm weak? That you chose a wife who can't handle their traditions? Clara shook her head. No, I go. I survive. I prove I belong here. Lucian set down the maps. Winter wolf hunts are brutal. You'll be on horseback in sub-zero temperatures, tracking animals that can kill trained soldiers. People die on these hunts. Then I'll make sure I'm not one of them. He crossed to stand behind her. His hands settled on her shoulders. I can't protect you out there. Not without making you look dependent. You'll be on your own. Good, Clara said. I'm tired of being protected. Time to prove I can stand beside you instead of behind you. Lucian turned her to face him. His expression was complicated, fierce and afraid and absolutely determined. Promise me something. What? If it becomes too dangerous, if you think you're going to die, run. Forget pride. Forget proving yourself. Just survive. Clara met his eyes. I promise. If I think I'm going to die, I'll do whatever it takes to live. It wasn't the promise he'd asked for. They both knew it. Lucian pulled her close. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other against the cold and the fear and the knowledge that tomorrow would test everything they'd become. Dawn came too fast and too cold. Clara dressed in layers of fur and leather that the northern women wore for hunting, boots designed for snow, gloves lined with wool, a knife at her belt because Lucian had insisted and she'd been smart enough not to argue. The hunting party gathered in the fortress courtyard. 50 nobles, mostly men but a dozen women who looked at Clara with expressions ranging from curiosity to contempt. Horses stamped and snorted, their breath misting. Hounds strained at leashes, eager for the chase. Lord Ravencrest rode at the head of the group, mounted on a massive black horse. He looked at Clara with cold amusement. Ready, Lady Clara? As I'll ever be. She mounted the horse Lucian's staff had prepared. It was a northern breed, sturdy and mean. She'd learned to ride as a child, but never like this. Never in conditions where a mistake meant freezing to death. Lucien stood at the fortress entrance, watching. He couldn't come. The hunt was for nobles and their spouses only. He had to stay behind and continue negotiations while Clara proved herself. Their eyes met across the courtyard. No words, just understanding. Then Ravencrest raised his hand and the hunt began. They rode into the mountains as the sun climbed toward noon. The cold was vicious, cutting through every layer Clara wore. Her fingers went numb within an hour. Her face felt like it was freezing solid. But she kept up, matched the pace, refused to fall behind. The northern women watched her with grudging acknowledgement. The men ignored her entirely, focused on tracking signs of the wolves. Around midday, the hounds caught a scent. They bayed and surged forward, pulling the hunters after them. The horses broke into a gallop, snow flying, the world blurring into white and gray. Clara's horse nearly stumbled on a hidden rock. She gripped with her thighs, keeping her seat through instinct more than skill. Her heart hammered. This was insane, absolutely insane. But she was still riding, still keeping up. The wolves appeared suddenly. A pack of 6, massive and white as the snow around them. They turned to face the hunters, their eyes reflecting light like mirrors. The northern lords drew weapons, spears and bows and swords designed for this exact purpose. Clara had a knife, just a knife. One of the wolves charged, not at the main group, at Clara specifically, as if sensing her weakness. Her horse reared. Clara clung to the reins, trying to control the animal while the wolf closed distance impossibly fast. Everything slowed. She could see the wolf's teeth, smell its breath, feel her own heart trying to punch through her ribs. Time to choose, run and survive and prove Ravencrest right, or fight and maybe die but refuse to be prey. Clara drove her heels into her horse's flanks. The animal surged forward, directly at the wolf instead of away from it. The wolf's eyes widened, shock, maybe, at prey that attacked. Clara pulled the knife from her belt. The wolf leaped. She threw herself sideways in the saddle, slashing as it passed. The blade caught flesh, blood sprayed across white snow. The wolf hit the ground, stumbled, recovered. It turned, snarling, preparing for another attack. Then an arrow took it through the eye. The wolf collapsed. Clara looked up. Lord Ironwood sat on his horse 20 feet away, bow still raised. "Nice move, girl," he called. Stupid, but nice. Other hunters were engaging the rest of the pack, spears flying, swords flashing. Within minutes, all 6 wolves were down. Clara's hands were shaking. Her entire body vibrated with adrenaline so intense she thought she might vomit. But she was alive. She'd faced a winter wolf and lived. Ravencrest rode up beside her. His expression was unreadable. "You charged it." "Yes." "Why?" "Because running would have proven I didn't belong here." Clara met his eyes. "And I do belong here. Because my husband belongs here. And I'll do whatever it takes to stand beside him." Ravencrest studied her for a long moment. Then he smiled. It was the first genuine expression she'd seen from him. "Maybe you will survive the North after all, Lady Clara." They returned to the fortress near dusk. Clara was exhausted, frozen, and covered in wolf blood that was slowly freezing to her clothes. Lucien met her in the courtyard. His eyes scanned her for injuries, his face pale with barely controlled fear. "I'm fine," she said before he could ask. "Mostly." He pulled her close, not caring who saw. His arms wrapped around her like he was afraid she'd disappear. "Don't ever do that again," he said into her hair. "Can't promise that." Clara's voice was muffled against his chest. "But I survived, and I think maybe earned some respect." "You earned more than respect." Lucien pulled back to look at her. "Ravencrest just told the other lords that anyone who disrespects you answers to him personally." Clara stared. "He what?" "You charged a winter wolf with a knife. Apparently that's the kind of insanity Northerners admire." Lucian's expression was complicated. "You could have died." "But I didn't. And now they see me as more than just the Grand Duke's southern wife." Clara's hands found his face. "We're winning, Lucien." Slowly. "But we're winning." "Not yet." His voice was grim. "Ravencrest respecting you doesn't mean the other houses will fall in line. We still have—" The fortress alarm bells started ringing, loud and urgent and absolutely terrifying. Thorne appeared at a run, his face grim. "Your Grace, we have a problem. Imperial messengers just arrived. The Empress has been arrested for treason. The Emperor is dead, and the Empire is about to tear itself apart." Clara felt the world tilt. Everything they'd been fighting for, every alliance they'd built, all of it suddenly meaningless. Because without the Emperor, there was no authority backing Lucien's position, no imperial law to enforce, no consequences for northern lords who wanted to reject southern rule. They were completely alone in hostile territory with no support and no way home. Lucien's hand found Clara's. His grip was crushing, his eyes were pale gray fire. "Gather the staff," he said quietly. "Secure the fortress. Send riders to Blackstone. We're about to find out if we've built enough loyalty to survive what comes next. Thorn ran to obey. Lucien looked at Clara. His expression was the most terrified she'd ever seen him. The Emperor is dead, he said, which means the Northern Lords have no reason to obey me. No consequences for rebellion, and 300 years of resentment toward Southern rule just became their excuse to take everything by force. Clara's mind raced. This was worse than the conspiracy, worse than the trial. This was the complete collapse of everything that had protected them. What do we do? She asked. Lucien's jaw tightened. We fight, because we don't have any other choice. The fortress bells kept ringing. Outside, Clara could hear shouting. Horses. The sound of an army mobilizing. The Northern Lords weren't going to negotiate anymore. They weren't going to test or challenge or play political games. They were going to take what they wanted, and nothing was going to stop them except the two people standing in this courtyard, holding each other against the coming storm. Clara looked up at Lucien, saw the man who'd risked everything to protect her, who'd taught her how to survive, who'd become the only person in the world she trusted completely. Then we fight, she said, together. And we show them exactly what happens when they mistake exile for weakness. Lucien's hand tightened on hers. The fortress bells screamed, and somewhere in the darkness beyond the walls, an empire's death rattle became the signal for war. The fortress walls trembled under the first assault. Clara stood on the battlements beside Lucien, watching torchlight spread across the valley below like burning blood. 3 northern armies converging on their position. House Ravencrest from the east, House Ironwood from the west, House Stormbreak holding the southern pass. Thousands of soldiers, enough to crush Blackstone's garrison 10 times over. Lucien's face was carved from stone. His hands gripped the wall hard enough that his knuckles had gone white. Beside him, Captain Thorn stood silent, calculating odds that didn't favor anyone inside these walls. How long can we hold? Lucien asked quietly. Thorn didn't sugarcoat it. 2 days. Maybe 3 if we ration everything and they don't bring siege engines. They'll bring siege engines, Lucien said flatly. This isn't a test anymore. This is extermination. Clara looked down at the armies assembling in the darkness. Somewhere in those ranks were the lords who'd hunted wolves with her just yesterday. The women who'd given her grudging respect. All of them united now by the simple reality that the Emperor's death had made Lucien's authority meaningless and his position vulnerable. The Northern Territories had been waiting 300 years for an excuse to throw off imperial rule. Tonight, they had it. A messenger ran up the stairs, breathless. Your Grace, Lord Ravencrest requests parley. He's waiting at the main gate with a white flag. Lucien's jaw tightened. It's a trap. Probably, Thorn agreed, but refusing might provoke an immediate assault. At least talking buys us time. Time for what? Clara asked. There's no reinforcements coming, no imperial army to save us. We're completely alone. Lucien turned to look at her. His eyes were tired, older than she'd ever seen them. I know, which means I have exactly 1 move left. He started toward the stairs. Clara grabbed his arm. Don't do anything stupid. Don't sacrifice yourself thinking it'll save the rest of us. Lucien's hand covered hers. His smile was sad. After everything we've been through, you still think I'm the kind of man who knows when to quit? You're the kind of man who makes impossible choices because someone has to. But this time, I'm asking you not to. She stepped closer, her voice dropping. We survive together or we don't survive at all. That's the deal. He pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. The world could have been ending around them and Clara wouldn't have noticed. All that existed was this moment, this man, this desperate, fragile thing they'd built from ruins and necessity. I love you, Lucien said quietly. I should have said it weeks ago, months ago, but I was too afraid that saying it would make you real, make losing you unbearable. Clara's throat felt tight. You already lost me the moment you decided I mattered. The rest is just details. He kissed her. Not desperate or hurried, slow and deliberate and full of everything they'd never said out loud. When he pulled back, his eyes were wet. Stay here, he said. Let me talk to Ravencrest alone. No. Clara's voice was steel. We face this together. Whatever he's offering, whatever trap he's set, we walk into it side by side. Lucien studied her face. Then he nodded. Together. They descended the stairs into a courtyard that smelled like fear and smoke. 50 guards stood ready, their faces grim. These were men who'd followed Lucian from the capital, who'd sworn oaths to protect him, who were about to die keeping those oaths because retreat wasn't possible and surrender wasn't an option. Clara looked at them and felt something crack in her chest. These weren't political pieces to be sacrificed. They were people. Human beings with families and lives and futures that would end because she and Lucien had been too proud or too stubborn or too desperate to find another way. The gates opened. Lucien and Clara walked through, flanked by guards, into the space between armies. Neutral ground that felt more like a killing floor. Lord Ravencrest waited, mounted on his black horse, surrounded by his commanders. His face was expressionless in the torchlight. Beside him sat Lord Ironwood and ancient Lord Stormbreak, all three united in a way they'd never been before. Clara's hand found Lucien's, their fingers laced together, holding on like drowning people gripping driftwood. Ravencrest dismounted, walked forward until he stood 10 feet from Lucian, close enough to talk without shouting. Grand Duke Arden, this doesn't have to end in bloodshed. Then why bring 3 armies? Lucian's voice was calm. Because we're not fools. We know your reputation, your capacity for violence when cornered. Ravencrest gestured to the forces behind him. This is insurance, a reminder that even if you fight, even if you kill 100 of us, you'll still lose. So you came to offer surrender terms. I came to offer you a choice. Ravencrest's eyes flicked to Clara, then back to Lucian. Leave. Tonight. Take your wife and your personal guard and ride south. Renounce your claim to the Northern Territories. Tell the new emperor, whoever that ends up being, that the North governs itself now. And if I refuse?